Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Shekhar Pandey, a cardiologist at Cambridge Cardiac Care Centre. Welcome to the 18th Annual Healthy Heart Day. Amazing, isn't it, that we've been doing this together for 18 years? I'm excited to be here with you today. Thank you for joining me. We're thrilled to be on Rogers TV and live streaming online on various platforms. As this event has grown in scope, we've been privileged to connect and share with people from coast to coast, across Canada, the US, but also around the world. Thank you for joining me wherever you are and for working with me as we learn strategies to stay heart healthy. Every year we change our focus for this event, addressing many of the issues facing cardiac patients and those who are at risk for heart disease, which unfortunately is most of us. Over the last few years, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many other diseases have taken a back seat and progressed unattended. This is particularly the case for women, who have often taken up the effort to support others, forgetting their own health. It's time for all of us to become heart heroes, to get healthy and stay heart healthy. During this event, our expert panel will share their knowledge and speak to the issues affecting us all, using a multidisciplinary, holistic approach. So much of what we impart to our Healthy Heart Day audience is applicable to everyone, men and women, young and old, because it's never too early or too late to get informed and develop healthy heart habits. After all, if we can prevent someone from having their first cardiac event many years from now, we've done our job. So we encourage you to grab your loved one by the arm, get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, and join us. I encourage you, make this event personal. Take a moment, set some SMART goals for yourself and write them down. So what are SMART goals? They should be specific. They should be measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Leave with a positive, renewed commitment to your health. This is one thread that every speaker at Healthy Heart Day touches upon, making a commitment to your health with practical, achievable goals.
We can be hurt. We can be bruised. We can be broken. Slowed down, confused, and even numbed. But we can't be defeated. We're built on a foundation that's strong, our mission unwavering, and together we'll beat as one.
I would now like to welcome our first speaker, Mayor Catherine McGarry. I remember meeting Catherine the first day I moved to Cambridge in 1998 and had the privilege to work with her at Cambridge Memorial Hospital, where she was a registered nurse for over 35 years. She was elected as MPP for Cambridge in 2014 and elected Mayor of Cambridge in 2018. She has been an avid supporter of Healthy Heart Day, as a nurse at the hospital, and subsequently as a politician. She has helped us sustain this event year after year. I welcome her greetings on behalf of the City Government and the citizens of Cambridge.
Hello everyone, I'm Catherine McGarry, the Mayor of the City of Cambridge. On behalf of the City of Cambridge and Cambridge City Council, I'm just delighted to be joining you again this year for Cambridge Cardiac Care's Heart Healthy Day. So here I am imagining that we've already done the early morning survivors walk in the days when we used to be in person. But soon we are returning to some semblance of normal with in-person events again. And this is such an important event for our community, and I'm so glad to see that it continued even during the pandemic. And I do understand that there have been even more people joining in virtually than the usual in-person event, and the in-person event was already crowded. So I'm delighted to see this continue. You may not know this, but heart disease is the #1 cause of death in Canada for women over the age of 55. And women are more likely to die from heart disease than from any other disease. It's a little known fact. But, as a woman myself, and I'm still working and caring for a family, I note that often women tend to neglect self-care as they tend to their careers, family, and their involvement in our community. How often do we hear, well, I'm sick, but I'm fine, I'm just going to carry on. So men, this is where you come in. When I used to nurse in the emergency department and the intensive care unit, I used to see people, men and women, coming in with chest pain or chest discomfort, and they were having a heart attack. And very often during the time that I was speaking to my patient, I would say, well, did your spouse tell you you needed to be in Emerge earlier than you came in? And yeah, they did. And that's where family members are crucial in encouraging women in particular to come into Emerge. Emergency personnel would far rather be able to tell the individual that they have something else rather than a heart attack. But indeed, we know that seconds count and that we need to ensure that people do get into the emergency department for some care right away. Damage can happen slowly to our hearts over time. And for that reason, it's really important to maintain an active and healthy lifestyle. The City of Cambridge is offering a variety of recreational activities for people of all ages, because healthy citizens make a healthy community. And no one knows that more than people that care for our community in healthcare. Our city promotes healthy, active living, as well as family and community relationships through our recreation programs. And certainly we continued this during the pandemic with our 50 plus centers that went online, our recreation online, our WOW or Without Walls program for our seniors that was conducted over phone so that we could continue in the comfort of our own homes doing exercise programs. So whether you're interested in sports, arts, fitness, health, or wellness, or personal development, the City of Cambridge does offer a variety of programs for all activity levels. You need to start somewhere. The City of Cambridge is also a river city, and we have an extensive trail system that creates many opportunities for a healthier, more active lifestyle. We have heritage walking tours. We have tours around, many trails right beside the river, and it's just a matter of getting out and do it. We're so fortunate in this community to have the resources like Cambridge Memorial Hospital, and in particular, this Cambridge Cardiac Center to help us all take care of our hearts. I can't tell you how many people have benefited from the teachings and the learnings that they pick up from all aspects of their healthcare here on Cardiac Heart Healthy Day. So I wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Pandy, his wife Michelle, and all of the volunteers and the speakers who have put this event together again. And I can't wait to do it again next year in person.
Thank you, Mayor McGarry, for your kind words of support and encouragement. So, let's get started. Thank you everyone for being with me for the 18th Annual Healthy Heart Day. Our focus this time is being your own heart health hero. I'm very excited that we have a dynamic and accomplished list of speakers that will be working with us over the course of this morning. Thank you again for joining me. It's been a rough few years for all of us. These last 2-3 years as we've gone through this pandemic, we've all constantly needed to wear masks, the constant hand hygiene, the need to distance ourselves from our loved ones, social distancing, being separated from those that we love and care for. It's been tough for all of us, but it has been particularly tough for heart health. There have been long wait times for heart surgeries and other procedures, delays in testing, delays in implementation of risk factor management strategies. And we've all unfortunately gained weight during this time and been under an enormous amount of stress. And certainly for those of us living in Ontario, we know that there's a big backlog of healthcare that's been delayed, that we've needed to postpone routine care because of the pandemic as we focused on getting past this viral illness. There'll be a lot of catch up. We'll all have to figure out how we can get back to where we need to be. But this is not unique to Ontario. We're seeing delays and wait times for procedures around the world. This is data actually from the UK, where they saw massive delays in patients getting heart procedures and getting care when they needed to. So this is a worldwide problem that we need to figure out how we're going to catch up. But certainly we also know that this virus is directly toxic to our hearts. It causes blood clots that can lead to strokes, lung damage, and heart damage. It can lead to inflammation in the heart muscle, leading to heart dysfunction and heart failure. And in fact, there's a condition called myocarditis, or inflammation of the heart muscle itself, that occurs 16 times more frequently in those that contract COVID-19 versus those that don't. This is a condition that we need to try to prevent, and vaccinations remain the best way for all of us to stay protected from this COVID virus. So if you haven't gotten your vaccines yet, please get vaccinated. And if you're due for your booster, please get boosted. That's how we're going to keep ourselves protected and get past this pandemic. And we know that this virus also causes other cardiac conditions. It increases the risk of heart attacks and strokes and arrhythmias, so many cardiac complications, partly because this virus actually gets into our bodies through a receptor called the ACE receptor. And that receptor is much more common within our hearts. Our heart tissue is laden with that receptor, and the virus gets in and can damage our hearts as a result of that. So we need to be cautious about this. We need to continue to keep ourselves protected. And as the WHO has said repeatedly, vaccinations are the best precaution we can take to keep ourselves protected from this virus. Where necessary, we still need to social distance, and when we're indoors and in crowded environments, we may still need to wear masks to keep ourselves protected as we get through and get past this virus. But certainly beyond the virus itself and its impact on the healthcare system, we know that it's had a huge impact on all of us. Our behaviors have changed. We've all been eating more, perhaps drinking a bit more, and generally doing a lot less physical activity than we have in previous years, as we've all been stuck indoors. On average, most of us have gained about 2 pounds per month, between 30 to 40 pounds over the course of this pandemic. How are we going to lose that weight? How are we going to regain our heart health? That's the focus of our event today. So not only has this virus been tough on our physical health, it's been hugely deleterious to our mental health. The amount of stress in our population today, leading to unhealthy diets, inadequate exercise, increased rates of smoking for the first time in a generation, lack of physical activity, increased alcohol consumption, all of which can contribute to obesity, onset of diabetes, higher blood pressure, higher cholesterol, and is toxic to our hearts. This has been particularly tough for women. We know that depression rates have been much higher during this pandemic, particularly in women. And depression is a risk factor for heart disease. So we all need to figure out a way to get past this virus, both for our physical health and our mental health. It's been a tough few years, but we need to make 2022 our year for heart health. We can do this. We can regain our stamina, our heart health, and move forward. And I think actually the pandemic has taught us that we can do this. The personal effort that each of us has put in to keep ourselves healthy, our families healthy, our loved ones healthy, and our community healthy. Wearing masks, distancing where necessary, getting vaccinated when we're asked to. All of that has helped us create a healthier community. If we can do all of those enormous tasks, I'm sure we can put that personal effort into staying heart healthy, get back to healthier diets, get more physical activity in, and work on our mental health, all of which will help us regain our cardiac health. It is something we can achieve. We can do this. These are practical things that we will be talking about today, and I'm thankful that you're with us as we work on regaining our heart health. I'm particularly thankful for the exceptional list of speakers that will be coming up that will guide us on our journey of recovery. I'm very happy and pleased that Dr. Peter Lynn has agreed again to speak to us. He will be addressing the mental health impacts of this pandemic and how we can regain our resilience, how we can regain our ability to stay focused on our health and our community's health. After Dr. Lynn, Dr. Cheng will be speaking to us about our physical health, how we can lead healthier diets, get more physical activity in, and prevent the onset of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And later today, I'm so grateful that Dr. Tara Sedlak has agreed to speak to us. Her focus will be on the impact of heart health for women, the unique nature of heart disease, and what women can do to stay heart healthy. I'm so thankful that she agreed to be participant in this event today. And later, we'll also be joined by exceptional health and wellness coaches. Cindy Catton, a certified kinesiologist and personal trainer, will be working with us, stretching and regaining our physical stamina and giving us practical things that we can do at home. Later, we'll also be joined by Jillian Monahan, a yoga and mindfulness trainer who will be working with us to regain mindfulness and focus and work on our mental health. I'm so grateful for both of them that they've agreed to join us today. And I'm thankful that you're with us today. But remember, this is not an event to talk. It's an event to do things. We all need to have practical goals that we will implement at the end of this event. SMART goals. Remember, SMART stands for specific. What are you actually going to do? It has to be specific. Are you going to be exercising an hour a week? Is it measurable? So set a specific goal that you can achieve. Is it achievable? Are you really ready to run that marathon next month? If you're not, don't set that as your goal. Set it as a practical, realistic goal that you can achieve in a timely manner. Set a time limit that you're going to get to that half-hour walk by the end of the month. Whatever the goal is, set it for yourself and make sure you work at it. That's the purpose of this event today. Thank you for joining me. It's both an honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Lynn, a friend, a colleague, and a recurrent presenter at Healthy Heart Day. His credentials as a health promoter are exceptional as Director of Primary Care Initiatives at the Canadian Heart Research Centre, a health correspondent for CBC Radio, and he runs 2 busy clinics in GTA. Peter has received a teaching award from the Canadian College of Family Physicians. He will guide us as we discuss how to adapt to a changing world and move forward to a new normal. He will discuss the emotional impact of COVID, the importance of resilience, utility of mindfulness as we all learn to cope and move on. Peter.
Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Lynn. I'm a family doctor in Toronto, Canada, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you about coping during the pandemic. So let's get started. So let's start here with the world changing. There's been many things. There was lockdown, then there was no lockdown, and then there was lockdown again. and then trying to live with it. They're now saying that we have to live with this virus. Now, what does that really mean? And so that's why you can understand that many people are concerned. Are we going to be attacked by the virus? Can we get back to normal? Can we get rid of masks? So these are all the things that people are thinking about. And I think initially it was quite confusing, right? So everybody's looking at it saying that we're not clear, like what is this virus and things like that. And as information has become clearer, we can see a path forward. And hopefully everybody can realize now that we can stay safe, and yet we can still get back to normal life as well. Now, let's talk about your perceptions. So there are different things that make us feel different things, okay? So for example, if you see things as a threat or a loss or injustice, you are going to feel different emotions. So let's go back to that and say, where do you feel and where do you fit in? And then we can move forward from there. So for example, let's say you see the virus as a threat. Then basically you're going to have fear and anxiety. And so that's why we see a lot of people very afraid to go back outside. They're not going to with your family and friends, or they're not going outside to restaurants because of the fear and anxiety of picking up the virus and becoming very ill. And that's a valid fear. And then the question is, how do we manage that? And that's what we're going to talk about today. The other possibility is loss. You might have lost a loved one from the virus. You might have lost your job from it. And so therefore loss will then bring sadness, despair, depression. So we're seeing a lot of people with depression symptoms. And so therefore we need to know how to handle that as well. And then finally, there's a group that feel that there's injustice. In other words, this is not right. And with that comes anger. And so therefore their livelihood may have been taken away. Family members might have taken them away. And so therefore there's injustice, and therefore they might have anger in addition to sadness and anxiety. So you can have a mixture of all of these things. And the question is, how do we move beyond that as we try to live with the virus, as everybody keeps saying? So these are the things that we're dealing with right now, and everybody will have a different level of each one. So each one might have a bit of threat feeling, a loss or injustice, but the levels will be quite different from one person to the next. So let's start off with stress. So this is important, right? So if there's no more toilet paper, that's very stressful. Similarly, how do I go back to work? How do I go back to social gatherings? Let's say I'm invited to a wedding. Do I go, not go? And you can see that stress now increases as we try to get back to normal life in terms of integrating within society. This is learned helplessness. Okay, I love this cat. And basically it's just sitting there and it's watching TV and it's not really caring about anything. And there is a real condition called learned helplessness, which basically says that because what you do doesn't matter, after time again, then basically people just give up. And so what happens is that when that happens, then people just say, forget about everything because there's nothing that I can do to alter it. And that's called learned helplessness. You learn to become helpless. And that's why we have to correct that, because I think that's what we're in right now, is that it doesn't matter what we do, the virus still comes back and the waves still continue to increase. So that's a very negative message for us all to have. So let's go back to the facts, because if we go back to the facts, then we understand the enemy. The enemy right now is the virus. And so the more information we have about that, the more we realize that we are in control and that we can actually do things to protect ourselves, but to still get on with our lives as well. So let's start off with something simple. Here's the virus, and basically the virus has got some spike proteins. Those act like keys so that they can get into your cells. And then inside the virus, there's a bit of blueprints, sort of information to make the virus. So it's a very simple thing. It's a set of blueprints with some set of keys that it can get into your cells. In a sense, it's kind of like a USB stick. A USB stick carries information, but by itself, it can't do anything. So similarly, this virus, it has to be brought to you by a person, just like a USB stick has to be brought to you by a person. And there's no feet or wings on this thing, so it cannot move on its own. It needs to be brought to you, and you need to suck it into your system. In other words, you have to actually breathe it in for it to work. Just like a USB stick, you have to plug it into the computer physically, and then it needs our factories. So just like a USB stick, it needs our computer before it can actually do anything. And same thing here, it needs our factories to produce more copies of itself. And so therefore, if you think about it, it needs us for every step of the way to move it around and to replicate this particular virus. Now, its only magical trick is that it is invisible. You can't see it. I mean, if you saw a USB stick coming towards you, you'd avoid it. But in this case, you can't see it. And there may be people that can carry the virus that don't look ill. And so therefore, they can transmit the disease before they get symptoms. So therefore, when you're looking for a sick person, they're actually looking quite fine, and they're the ones that can pass on the virus. So those are the tricks that the virus is using. And so if you know those tricks, then it's quite simple. If you have a mask on, if you put some distance between you and other people, then the virus cannot make it across to you. And then just avoid the breath of another person, because that's how this USB stick comes across, is when other people are breathing in your direction, and then you have to suck it in. So all of a sudden, it's actually quite straightforward as to what we need to do to keep ourselves safe as we're moving on with getting on with our lives. So here's a little baby, and I love this picture. I wish we could see the virus. I mean, if you could see the virus floating around the air, coming out of people's mouths, you're not going to go near them and breathe it in. And so that's why if we had a way to see the virus, that would be good. But then in place of seeing it, let's just assume that there's this viral cloud coming out, kind of like smoke coming out of people's mouths. And therefore, if we avoid that smoke, then basically we're not going to breathe in the virus. So maybe we can just imagine people having that virus cloud around them, and then we'll do all the right things to protect ourselves. Now, if you're thinking about talking to people, that's actually quite normal, right? That's normal conversation. But this is one of the fastest way that the virus can spread. So for example, if the Omicron virus, for example, loves your trachea, so your windpipe here. So that means that all the air that you blow out, whether it's through your nose or through your mouth, will pick up the virus, and therefore it's full of virus going out. And that's why the Omicron virus was so successful, because it's in a location that every bit of air that you blow out, whether you're laughing or anything like that, will send out a lot of viral particles. Now, this viral particles, as you can see, is very close to the other fellow, and all he has to do is suck that in, and then therefore he would pick up the virus, and then he would get infected, and so on and so forth. And that's how the pattern goes. Now, for those of you that have been vaccinated, the little Y stands for antibodies. So you have antibodies on the inside of your body, which will stop the virus from invading. It cannot stop the virus from growing in your nose. That's the problem, because the antibodies can't get into that space. They're too large. And so therefore you can still pick up the virus in your nose, which means you can still carry and transmit to other people. But thankfully, at least you have an army on the inside to defend you against invasion. So that's why we always say the vaccine protects you against hospitalization, dying, those kinds of things. But it can't really stop you from picking up the virus in your nasal passages, for example, or in your throat. So that's why we have to still be careful when you're around people not to pick up the virus and then accidentally bring it back to grandma or something like that. So even if you're vaccinated, we still want you to take protection. Now, what kind of protection are we talking about? Basically, if I put a mask on this person, all of a sudden the sucking power is reduced. In other words, the virus particle now has to be much closer to him in order for him to breathe it in. And that's really what the mask is doing, is that it's putting barriers in the way. So therefore your sucking force has been reduced, and therefore virus needs to be much, much closer to you before you can suck it into your body. If we put a mask on the other fellow, what we're doing is we're keeping the viral particles near him. So that way he's not spraying them out. So it doesn't have to be perfectly sealed. You know how people are saying we have to have perfect seals and everything else. As long as the virus is kept near that person, it is not going towards the other person, then the other person has a hard time sucking it in. And so that's why masks on both sides would be helpful. For the person that has the virus, it'll slow down the spread of the virus to other people. For the person that doesn't have a virus, it slows down their ability to suck in the virus. And that's why masks on both sides would be very helpful. You've heard about face shields, not very expensive piece of plastic that's sitting there. And basically that adds another layer of protection. In other words, the virus has a hard time getting past that face shield. So if you're infected, it's harder to spray the virus outward. If you're not infected, it's very hard to suck a virus around a face shield, so the air that you're breathing is pretty much the air near you. So let's say you're looking after somebody that's ill at home, then I would suggest you wear a mask and a face shield when you go near that particular person. And that way your chance of picking it up would be reduced. It's kind of like doctors and nurses looking after patients at the hospital. They have their face shields, their mask on, and so on and so forth when they go in and look after them. Why shouldn't we do the same thing? And the face shields are kind of cheap. So therefore it's a piece of plastic that you wear on top of your mask as well. Also, if you have to get close to somebody, if you think about it, you need to suck it in. So let's say you hold your breath for the 5 seconds that you need to do something for your loved one that's close up, then basically you will not be sucking in the virus. So as a last resort, we can just hold our breath for a couple of seconds when we're close to people, and that way you're not sucking in the virus. So when I'm checking somebody's eye, for example, in my office, I tell them, okay, you hold your breath for 5 seconds, I'll hold my breath for 5 seconds, and I can get very close to you, and we will not be exchanging any air, and therefore not exchanging any viral particles. So these are all the things that we can do to make our lives safer, even if somebody is ill around you that you have to look after. Now, getting together. So the problem is when we get together, we chit chat, and the virus comes out of our breath. And so therefore, if we're close together, chit-chatting, especially face-to-face, close up, you can imagine at parties when the music is loud, I can't hear you, so I get close to you, we start shouting at each other, and now the viral particles will begin to move. And so that's why we used to blame it all on parties and things like that. But realistically, you and I just standing in front of each other, just having a lunch across a table, I can spray enough virus towards you. And so that's why it's not necessary to be at a huge party to pick this up. You can just be with another person who has the virus, and therefore we can transmit. So that's why when we had those limitations of 5 people or 10 people, it was a bit artificial, because all you need is 2 people. If I have it and I carry it to you and I spray it at you, then you suck it in, then we're done. So this idea that it's only big parties or whatever isn't quite correct. It's the breath of the other person that we're trying to avoid. One of the interesting things about this virus is the amount of virus that you produce over time. So this is over a 28-day period. And so basically you could see that the viral particles, I'm going to draw a little triangle here, is actually high at the beginning. So right away, your body is producing a lot of virus, and that's why this thing can transmit so quickly. In fact, there's virus about 2 days before you have symptoms. So 2 days before you start feeling the sore throat or coughing or anything like that, you are now passing the virus, which now is very dangerous because you don't look sick. Whereas you remember SARS-1, when you got that one, you got very sick. So people looked at you and said, you look terrible, I'm going to stay away from you. Or you ended up in hospital already. So the chance of that virus finding another person to infect was low because people weren't around you. In this case, you look perfectly fine. So therefore you can pass that virus without you knowing that you have the virus, and then the other person has picked it up. You're not coughing or sneezing or anything like that. And that's why this virus is able to spread around so quickly, because the people carrying it don't look ill. And so therefore, when public health told us isolate when you have symptoms, it was too late, right? By the time you have symptoms, you already passed the disease and the virus on to other people already. And so therefore, it began this ripple effect. And I call it a ripple effect because it looks like that going outward. So let me show you what happened. So let's say you went to a party or just a luncheon with you and I passed you the virus. So the first 2 or 3 days, the virus is going to set up shop. That's the incubation period. So it's sort of getting itself organized, sort of taking over your cells, I guess, if you will. Then it starts to produce in the next 2 days. So during that production of lots of virus, now you're able to infect other people in that little red section. And then you start feeling sick. And when you start feeling sick at that point, and then you test yourself, then you have a positive result. And when you have a positive result, then you say, I've got the infection. But already you've infected your whole family and your loved ones, whomever you were around. Some of those might be your coworkers. In other words, you went to work because you were feeling fine. So now you got family members and coworkers that are now infected. So now what happens is that they begin their journey, right? So the virus now incubates in them, sets up shop, and then they start to spread over the next 2 days. And then they will get sick a couple of days later, and then they will have a positive test. And then they will have infected their family and coworkers and friends and so on and so forth. And then they too will begin their journey of incubation followed by transmission. So you can see what happens here is that you're now getting a huge ripple effect. So from one person, you can now see the number of people infected is quite high. So with the infection rates going so high, you can see numbers of people going increasing at exponential rates. And that's why this virus is able to spread over such a huge area in such a short amount of time. And so that's why it's important for us to protect ourselves, right? In other words, don't expose yourself to the virus. And then more importantly, don't pass it on to other people. So as soon as I do something risky, for example, I go to a party or something like that, then I now have to isolate myself away from my family and friends. And so that becomes a problem. What are you going to do? Every time you go out, you have to isolate. So that becomes one of the problems that we face as to why this virus continues to burn through families and friends. Eating is a very difficult time, because that's when everybody's mask is off. And generally speaking, we're closer together. So eating time is when we have to pay some special attention. Now, if you're eating at work, I tell people that's easy. You just turn away from people, find a different time to work. We've had people that, in good weather, they go into their cars to eat, to isolate from other people. But the most important thing is not to be face to face with somebody. So it's here, this direction, that's the most important one. So that's why sitting right across the table from somebody else that's eating would not be a good idea. Even if you staggered a little bit, so that you're not directly facing each other, that would be better. If you sit at round tables actually give you a bigger distance between the people. So you might have 4 or 5 feet from your face to the next person's face. So these are things that we can think about to try and improve, the safety. And then the most scary one is face-to-face shouting or singing, so because the virus load is going to be very high going across. And so in those situations, after you've done eating, for example, and you want to chit chat, let's just put the mask back on. So if we put the mask back on, the viruses are more or less trapped on the side near the person, and you're not breathing their airspace. So once we're done eating, let's make sure that we put the mask back on. So at social events, maybe that's what we should do. So when we're about to eat, everybody's mask comes off, but then we try and put as much distance as possible, and perhaps we bubble people. So the family that hangs together eats together, and then once we're finished eating, we can put back the mask on, and then you can mingle and talk to other people. So maybe those would be a good option to make the social event still happen, but then we minimize the risk of passing along the virus. So the mask now becomes useful in anything that you do, right? So I tell people it's kind of like permission. So if you wear a mask, then you get to do all those nice things without getting sick. I think that's the important thing, as opposed to we would like to get rid of the mask, because I think there's a sense that if we can get rid of the mask, that means we're normal again. But what we're seeing is every time we get rid of the mask, the numbers go up, and then we have to put them back on again. In the United States, we've seen Philadelphia, for example, put back on their masks and things like that. So there are places that are now reinstating the mask. So why don't we just keep it for now so that we don't have those numbers running up? What about vaccines and things like that? So when Delta came along, the 2 shots weren't bad. Okay, so the Delta version, the 2 shots were not too bad, was still giving some protection. When Omicron came along, the 2 shots was not enough. So the antibodies weren't sticking as well, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the suggestion is 3 shots, for people. So that way we have enough of the antibodies. And it may be that for this particular virus, we do need 3 shots, because like hepatitis B, we actually give 3 shots just right off the bat, because that's how many shots that you need to protect yourself. So maybe with this virus, we're running into that same thing where you need 3 shots. There are some people that are immunocompromised. They might not make as many antibodies. So even 3 shots is not enough. So they would qualify for 4 shots, for example. So elderly, immunocompromised people, maybe they need another chance to make those antibodies. And so that's why you might be hearing 4th shots for people as well. Now, does 3 shots really work? And this is a little bit of data, and this from the UK. And basically they said, okay, the first panel is people with 2 shots. And you can see in the black little dots, that's the protection against Delta. And that's pretty good. It's close to that 100%. Whereas the little circles, that's Omicron. And as you could see, as you get further out from your shots, like out to 25 weeks, for example, you could see that now the protection is not so good, it comes down. And so that's when they started thinking, maybe we should give you a 3rd shot. And so this is what happens if you get a 3rd booster. And this was using the Pfizer one, for example. You can see that the black dots, the Delta is still very good, staying around 100. And then you can see now Omicron has been lifted up. So in other words, the protection from Omicron and infection and going into hospital and things like that is being reduced. So in other words, it's better protection again. And the same thing happened if you gave a Moderna shot, for example. You can see that that number is lifted up. And I think that's where the recommendation came from, that 3 shots may be able to defend you against Omicron in terms of going into hospital. Now, it won't stop you from getting infected. Remember, you can get infected just in your nose. Your army is on the blood side. So you still have to be careful, because people have gotten, Omicron, the first version and the second version and things like that. So let's make sure that we still protect ourselves. So your army is to stop you from going into hospital, but then you can still pick up the virus in your nose, even if you've gotten 3 shots, for example. So the thought process is this, is that the snake is going to keep changing. And we've all had this before, right? You turn on the news and there's another version of, the virus. So first it was Omicron, then BA1, then BA2. Now there's BA3, BA4, BA5. It's almost like, smartphones, they keep upgrading. And there's even one called XE. Now, XE, what's interesting about that, it's a mixture of BA1 and BA2. And so therefore, we know that BA2 is better at transmission than BA1. But now the XE, this mixture, is actually even better than that. So it's almost like the virus is improving and coming up with newer models. And the reason why that one is happening is that in England, they don't have isolation. So in other words, if you're infected, you can still go about your day. So let's say I pick up BA1, so one version of the virus, and then before I get better, I go out and I pick up the second version. So now within my body, the both versions are together and they can mix and match. They can say, okay, here, you use this part, use this part. So now we can mix and match and make new viruses in this way. So that's going to speed up mutations very much, because before, mutations happen when we make mistakes in photocopying the virus. So when we're copying the virus each time, we make a little mistake. And if that mistake is useful, then the virus will keep it. If it's not useful, then the virus isn't going to go anywhere. So that takes time and it's random. Whereas now we can mix and match complete parts, sort of like, hey, I've got a good part that you can use. And so that's our concern, is that as we shorten isolation period times, then there's a chance of a person picking up more than one virus, and then in their body, they can actually mix and match and create new viruses. In Canada, initially our isolation was 14 days. Then they chopped it to 10 days, and then they chopped it to 5 days because they realized that people didn't look very sick, but they needed to get people back to work. Now at 5 days, I'm still producing a lot of the original virus. And then now, let's say I go out and then I pick up the next one. Even with the 5-day isolation, I can now become a little test tube incubator to create new viruses. So therefore, the goal is not to pick up multiple viruses in your body. Actually, the goal is not to pick up any virus in your body. And that's why the mask and distance and everything else is so important. A little bit about long COVID. This is where the virus is gone, but people still feel terrible. And one thought that people had is that inside your cell, you have these things called mitochondria. They're your power plants. They're the ones that make energy for your cells. And so there's some research going on where they said, we usually need fuel to go into our power plant. And we have two types of fuel. We have glucose, which is giving you quick energy. And that way it gets you going right away. And then we burn fat, which is the long energy. So let's say you're running in a marathon, then you're going to be burning fat as well. So in other words, we burn two types of fuel. And there's a balance between the two. So I can get you quick energy, and then I need you to last for a long period of time. It turns out that the virus comes in and it flips the switch mainly to looking for the quick energy. So it mainly flips you over to the glucose side. And so therefore, the fat burning side is not as important for the virus. And that's because the virus is trying to build copies of itself. So it needs a lot of energy and things like that. However, when the virus is gone, the system may be still set in that weird way. So in other words, it's still burning the wrong kind of fuel. And so therefore you have quick energy so that you can get up and go. But then what happens is that you have no energy after that. In other words, you're not sustained because you haven't flipped over to burning the long kind of fuel that you need. So that might be one of the explanations of why people said, yeah, I can get up for about 3 minutes and then I'm just exhausted. I just have no more energy. And to fix that, what we need to do is slowly build up. In other words, just like an athlete, you just train a little bit at a time. And what you're doing is telling the body, hey, I need more sustainable energy. So your body eventually will say, oh, this guy's going for a long time. So let's start to burn the other fuel that we have. So hopefully that might be a way to help some of these people with long COVID symptoms. These are the long COVID symptoms that people report. These are different organ systems. And the line is the percentage of people. So the bigger the line, the more people that have those symptoms. I'll just point out one of these ones. And you can see this, like fatigue and post-exertional malaise, meaning I go and exercise, I'm just exhausted afterwards. And look at this, it's almost like 100% of the people have this. So you can imagine if we have a lot of people getting infected, we're going to have some difficulty because we now have a lot of people that are tired afterwards. They won't be able to do their job. They won't be able to look after their children. So that's why getting COVID is not a good idea because of all these complications. And how long does it last? This is going out to 28 weeks, for example. And you can see all these crazy symptoms. I'll just focus in on those two, the fatigue, which is in green, and then post-exertional tiredness. So after they exercise, they're tired. So the fatigue one is 80% of the people have it for 28 weeks. So that's a very long period of time. And then this one, the post-exertional malaise, you can see it actually ramps up afterwards. And then basically they stay there. So about 70% of the people will have that. So that's why we don't want people to get COVID, because the long COVID complications are quite bad. The other thing they started looking at is the veterans database. So, the older folks that were war heroes and things like that in the US, the veteran database. And they said, do they have more heart disease? And so they looked at all of these different types of heart diseases, heart attacks, strokes, blood clots, and heart rhythm problems. And they noticed that if you had COVID, you're a 200% higher chance of having one of those bad things. And so that means that by having COVID, the virus is gone. In the next year, there's a 200% difference between those people and people that didn't have COVID in terms of all of these illnesses. So therefore, we have to pay attention. There are some long-term complications of COVID as well. This one, they looked at how sick were you? Were you in the intensive care unit? Were you in the hospital? Were you just, at home? And what they noticed here, I'm just going to draw a line here. The orange dot this reddish orangey color, is basically people that ended up in hospital. And you could see that they are 300% higher chance of having these complications compared to normal people that didn't have COVID. The purple dots are the people that ended up in intensive care unit. And there we're talking about 500 to 700% increase. So huge numbers going up. And the green dots are the people that got COVID, but were at home. So they weren't that sick. And if you look at the green dots, it's about 20 to 70% increased risk. So just by having COVID, we have increased risk for all of these complications in the long run as well. So that's why we really don't want to get COVID if we can possibly do that. Now, it's interesting. Kaizen is a word from Japan. And basically, it actually means change for good. And I think people have interpreted it now as meaning continual improvement. In other words, constantly improving. And that's what we're trying to do right now in terms of the virus. So in the beginning, we knew nothing about the virus. Now we know a lot about the virus. How does it transmit? How is it mutating? Is the vaccines working and things like that? So we have a lot of things, including medications and therapies that we can give. So I want you to get the sense that we're improving, that we know the enemy, and we're now, making strides against the enemy as well. However, we don't want to get the enemy. So in other words, if you get the virus, then you enter this, am I going to have a mild case of it or severe case? So I call it lotteries or slot machines. Every time you pull the slot machine, this is what you're going to be, facing in terms of the odds. So the moment you get the virus, is it going to be mild or severe? That's your first lottery that you're entering. Once you're well from the virus, then the second lottery that you're entering, am I going to have those long COVID things or not? So that's why, if we can, let's not go into a war with the virus. So not letting the virus come on board is probably the best thing. And even if you've been infected, for example, let's not get a second infection. And let's make sure that if you have heart disease, for example, right, we make sure your blood pressure is controlled, blood pressure, diabetes, and everything else. Make sure all of those things are well controlled, because the COVID has increased your risk. So we have to make sure you quit smoking and everything else. So let's use that as a driving force to make all the other, heart healthy kind of things happen to make sure that you're safe. Now, in terms of getting back to normal, people are moving around and things like that. I think the key thing is, I think the mask will be helpful no matter what. So no matter what we're being told, the mask right now, because the case counts are very high in the community, it is going to be always useful, and a little distance is useful. Now, I've been joking around with this idea of a COVID forecast, like we have weather forecasts, we have, pollen forecasts. Why don't we have a COVID forecast? And that way we can say, after a long weekend, that the chance of you bumping into the virus is very high. We're looking at sewage water and it's very high cases. So therefore you need to use protection. You need to use your mask. You need to use your distancing. So perhaps if we give people that locally, then people can make the right decisions as to how to protect themselves. So just like we do with this heavy rain or freezing rain or something like that, we then change our behavior. So if I know it's freezing rain tonight, I might not go out tonight, or I'm going to go earlier, or I'm going to drive safer, that kind of thing. So that way we minimize the effect of whatever that thing is. So in the case of COVID, we can minimize the effect by telling people it's a high risk right now, please put back on your mask and distance, and that might be helpful. And I came up with this, we all love hockey, so then I came up with the hockey analogy. So the vaccine is your goalie, and your masks are your defensemen. And then distance is your forwards. They keep the puck away from you. So therefore they're very helpful. So if we use all three of these things, then it's very successful. However, in some of our kids, they can't take the vaccine. Or there's no vaccines for them yet. And so therefore they don't have a goalie. So that's why at schools, for example, if we get rid of the mask as well, now we have no defensemen either. And basically we have an empty net situation. Now an empty net is fine when there's no pucks around. But let's say you have a lot of pucks around. In other words, let's say we have 20,000 cases and each person is producing 1 million viral particles. That's what they tell me that each person may produce. So now you're talking a huge number of pucks on an empty net. And so therefore it will look something like this. So the bottom line is that COVID-0 is possible if we use all our players, right? In other words, use the vaccine, use the defenseman, use the distance. And if we use it appropriately, then we can keep the virus away from yourself, which then means it's kept away from your family and friends because you won't bring it to them. So I think these are very important but simple things that we could do. So we don't need any fancy technology, or we don't need a special anything. These are things that you and I can do on a daily basis. I know that when this whole pandemic started, it was very disorganized. People didn't know what to do, didn't know, should we be locking down? Can I go and see a person? Is it dangerous just to be on the street? I remember the street was deserted, at that time. But over time, we've put it together. In other words, everybody, doctors, nurses, scientists, patients,
have put it together. So now we know what the storyline is. And we kind of keep coming back to the same thing, is that the virus, no matter how it changes, it cannot physically move on its own, and it cannot replicate by itself. So it needs us for every single step of its life cycle. And so therefore, if we interrupt it at any moment, the life cycle stops, and then this virus will be gone. So therefore, there's great hope. In other words, when I'm looking at it, there's great hope because we know the enemy very well. And the things that we need, quite simple, a 50-cent mask and a bit of, distance, a couple of feet around you, and not breathing somebody's air. In other words, hold your breath if you have to be close to people, stay a little bit further away. And that's all we have to do. And it doesn't matter how many new versions of this virus comes, we will still be able to protect ourselves from it. And I think that's a hopeful message that we can carry forward. Anyway, thanks very much. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter. That was inspiring and educational. To you, the audience, what SMART goals were you able to create from his talk? Now it's time to get up and get moving and put into action what Dr. Lin has encouraged us to do, to get up and get physical for our heart health. To help us do that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Cindy Catton, a registered kinesiologist, a personal trainer, and the owner and operator of Citrus Root Personal Training. Cindy specializes in exercise programming for complex medical conditions, injury rehabilitation, and mastering lifelong fitness goals. Cindy, please help us get up and get moving and get our heart pumping.
Thank you for joining me for Healthy Heart Day. Today we're going to work through some stretches. Work at your own pace and join me if you can. We're going to start with the lower extremities or lower body. First thing I want you to do is extend the leg out, nice and tall through the upper body. Lean forward if you feel comfortable and feel a nice long stretch through the hamstring. If you want to, you can point and flex your foot. If you're comfortable in the seated position, stay here and I'll show you what the standing position looks like. Nice and tall, good. Let's switch to the other leg. Foot forward, leg forward, lean in just a little bit and feel a little bit of a stretch through that lower leg, upper leg, and if you're ready, point and flex the toe. Good. We're getting the blood flowing a little bit here. Now that standing position, if you want to, nice and tall, abs nice and strong. Step 1 foot forward, lift the toe up, and then lean forward a little bit. Again, feeling the stretch through the leg, hamstrings, a little bit through the calf. Good, and if you want to, point and flex the toe. If you're still seated, keep doing the same thing. Nice work. Nice and tall here. Other foot comes forward, abs nice and strong. Toes come up, lean forward. Make sure you've got a little bend in the opposite leg, feeling the stretch through the hamstring, through the calf muscle. Point and flex the toe. Getting the blood moving a little bit. That's it. Good. If you want to stay in the standing position, you can. If not, you can sit back down, nice and tall through the upper body. Inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. Good. Add in the arms this time. Inhale and exhale. Good work. And if you're standing, here we go. Inhale and exhale. Good job. A little bit of movement here. Step wide if you want to and switch your legs one to the other. Weight through the left leg, weight through the right leg. We're just moving the blood around a little bit, feeling a little bit comfortable, stretching through the inner thigh. Good work. Feel the stretch here, inner thigh stretch. Nice and tall through the upper body. Make sure your foot is planted and watch this opposite leg and the knee. Make sure you're nice and steady here. Good. Side to side again. Nice and strong, nice and tall through the abdominals. Good. And we're going to do the other side. Stretch here through that inner thigh. Make sure the other leg's nice and stable, knees nice and strong. Good. Nice and tall. I'm going to move into that seated position. If you want to do the same stretch, you're going to walk the legs in and out. Good. In and out. There we go. And now step one leg wide. Good. Lean forward just a little bit and feeling that stretch through the inner thigh. Good, and we're gonna switch to the other side. Other leg out to the side, lean forward, little stretch through that inner thigh. Good work. Inhale again. Arms come up, exhale. Good work. Shoulder roll here. Yes. And if you're in that standing position, up you come. Good, inhale, shoulder roll, reach back, arms come up. Good, the blood's flowing, we're feeling happy. Shoulder roll back, nice work. Okay, we want to do a little bit more through the legs. Step forward if you're with the chair, take that leg up and behind. If you need something to hang on to, you can touch the wall, you can touch the chair in front of you, counter if you're in the kitchen. Now we're feeling a stretch through the quadricep, in through the hamstring a little bit, in through the hip flexors. Good, nice and tall. Keep that leg on the chair or the couch behind you. Now, if you're in the standing position, you're feeling very comfortable balancing, stand on one leg, contract the abdominals, and reach behind you for that leg. Good, knees stay together, nice and tall, hang on to the shoelaces. All of these stretches you can hold for 10 or 12 seconds, a little bit longer if they're feeling comfortable. Any stretches that don't feel comfortable, just don't do them. Or do a less version, right? Something that's comfortable for you. Knees stay together, nice and tall through the upper body. Good. Here we go. If you're balanced and you're comfortable, hang on to those shoelaces. Keep your knees together, nice and tall through the upper body, holding on to those shoelaces. Good, how are we doing, everyone? Excellent, looking good. Take that leg down, good. Inhale again, we still want that upper body to be moving, good. And exhale, shoulder roll back. Good, let's move into some upper body stretches. If you would like to sit back down again, you can. Nice and tall through the upper body. We're gonna work through the arms. Take them nice and wide and put the hands up and down. Good, we're just moving through the shoulders a little bit, moving through the elbows and the wrists, making sure everything feels comfortable. You got it. Looking good. Good, now take the hands to the shoulders and back out again. Shoulders and back out. Good. Just a little bit of movement. Okay, out widen again, up and down. Now, if you can, try and do the opposite hands, up and down. Yeah, a little bit of extra brain work, isn't it? You got it. Good, I like it. Okay, let's relax there. Good, shoulder roll here. Good, nice and tall still. Tuck your chin in, keep your shoulders down and back. Bring one arm across the front. We're gonna open up the shoulder a little bit. Good, if this is uncomfortable, you need to bend the elbow, that's okay too. We wanna work through here. Upper shoulders, excellent. Good, hold there for a few seconds and relax. Shoulder roll again, shake out those arms. Take the other arm across. Remember, nice and long if you can. If this is uncomfortable, you can do a little bend and bring it in across the chest. Good, nice and tall, nice and strong. That's it, and relax those arms. Shoulder roll, feeling comfortable. Take those hands straight out front. We're just gonna do a little bit of movement, hands to shoulders. That's it, elbows up high. We want the blood moving through that upper body. Good, take those hands out again, up and down. A little bit of more movement through the shoulder. You got it. Good. Okay, take one hand and just pull those fingers down just slightly. Yes, a little bit through the forearm. Good. And relax that side, and let's do the other side. Stretch out those arms. We want to stretch out the arms nice and long through the wrists, a little bit through the fingers. Good, and shake it out. Good, shoulder roll again. Okay, we've got to do some upper body through the upper back. So interlace those fingers, get those arms out nice and strong. Good, we want to open up those shoulder blades, round out the shoulders, reach those hands nice and far. You got it, looking good. Okay, relax, and now let's do the upper body and the chest. So if you can, interlace those fingers behind you. That's it. Take those hands behind and reach and open up. That's it. Now, if you're in the standing position, and if you need to move a little bit, again, interlace those fingers behind you, reach those hands up. Feel a little bit of a stretch through the upper body. Good. If you need to and can't reach behind you, then you're going to reach for that chair. Open up the chest through the chair and reach the arm behind you. Yeah, how's that feel, everyone? Good, let me step to the other side. Reach that hand for the chair, the couch, the wall, whatever's gonna work to help open up those chest muscles. Good, you got it. And back in front of that chair, have a seat. Good, shoulder roll. We want to relax that upper body. Okay, we're just gonna work through the neck now. Chin down to the chest. Good, stretching out the back of the neck. Very good. And up nice and tall. I want you to look at the ceiling, stretching out the front of the neck. And you might even feel that in through the shoulders. Good, whatever is comfortable for you today. Good, back to center. Little stretch here. Feel that stretch through the ear to the shoulder. If you want, you can drop that arm down. Feeling the stretch through the side of the neck and into the shoulder. Back to center, nice and comfortable. Good, and now switch sides, ear to shoulder. Feeling the stretch here through the neck. Drop the arm down if you want a little extra stretch there. Good, and back to center. Shoulder roll again, nice and relaxed. Good, and we're gonna inhale. And exhale, bring those hands down. Good, one more time, join me if you can. Inhale, and exhale. Good, I hope you enjoyed your stretch session. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Cindy, for getting my heart pumping and getting me ready to do my presentation later today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, a friend, a colleague, and a frequent presenter at Healthy Heart Day. Dr. Chang is a member of the Division of Endocrinology and Metabolism at Trillium Health Partners, Credit Valley Hospital in Mississauga, and St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. She's an associate professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto. She completed her medical school, as I did, and her internal medicine and endocrinology training at the University of Toronto, and has completed the Master Teacher program offered through the Department of Medicine in Toronto. She has served on the Expert Committee for Canadian Diabetes Association Guidelines, and she is currently the chair of the Guidelines Committee of the Canadian Society of Endocrinology and Metabolism. In addition to guideline development, she is currently involved in continuing education and has received a certificate of recognition from the Ontario College of Family Physicians for her contribution to diabetes care and family medicine education. She's also an associate editor of the Canadian Journal of Diabetes. Today, she will be sharing with us some thoughts on building a stronger habits in stressful times, discussing the dangers of being unfit, weight gain common for many of us in the pandemic, and the spectrum of conditions leading to diabetes, the importance of a healthy diet, setting an exercise program, and reinforcing SMART goals for each of us. Alice?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on building stronger habits in a stressful time. My name is Dr. Alice Chang, an endocrinologist from the University of Toronto, and I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to share some time with you as part of this agenda for Healthy Heart Day in order to help you lead healthier, longer lives. So the focus today is going to be on building stronger habits. And yes, it has definitely been a very stressful time over the last couple of years, and I think everyone would agree with that. March 11th, 2020 was when the World Health Organization declared that COVID-19 was a global pandemic. I suspect many of us remember when that news came, although to be completely honest, we knew that this was coming given the cases of COVID that were already rising by the time the final decision was made. But on that day, the official ruling came that it was declared a pandemic, and in some ways, it seemed like the world stopped and was temporarily closed. I think all of us thought at the time that it would be temporary. However, here we are now in April of 2022, 2 years plus later, and we are still in a situation where we are dealing with COVID, although I would argue that we are getting better at dealing with COVID with more tools to help us. However, I want you to think about the impact that this stressful time has had on you and has had on your health. Pause for a moment and consider that, because I think it has affected all of us in different ways and probably affected us in different ways at different times in the last 2 years. And if I just think about some of the words that come to mind, if I were to reflect on what has it been like for the last couple of years during this stressful time, I think some of the words that may come to mind are things like worry, anxiety, too much screen time, having family either too close if you've been working from home or too far if you've not been able to visit with family. School has been a challenge for many. Online learning has been very difficult. And likely what's been happening with your food intake has changed over the last couple of years, for better or for worse. And then of course, physical activity has also been compromised during this time. So this impact of the pandemic and the subsequent changes to our lifestyle in terms of lockdowns, social distancing, has definitely impacted our day-to-day living and certainly our habits. And if we think about this in terms of our physical health, there is certainly the mental health aspect, which we cannot speak enough about, which has definitely affected all of us. But also from a physical health perspective, there has also been an impact because of changes in stress levels, physical activity, and food intake, and also perhaps access to our usual care for our chronic diseases. And this impact is definitely global. It is not specific to Canada. And if you do a quick literature search, you find articles such as these: weight gain associated with COVID-19 lockdown in children and adolescents, a systematic review and meta-analysis. So therefore, it's affecting a wide range of ages as well, but also different populations. So this is a journal article looking at lifestyle variations during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, looking at a Jordanian adult population. And here's another study looking at young adults in Malaysia. And then here's another study looking at the older population in the cities of India. And then finally, a study here looking at the United Kingdom. And all of these are sending a very consistent message that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted society around the world. We are no exception. And this has, for the most part, resulted in increase in weight, increase in the percentage of people with overweight or obesity, and a decrease in physical activity, and therefore a decrease in overall health. Having said that though, the other thing that these studies have told us is that there is a lot of variability. These last couple of years have impacted people differently. For some people, it has been exactly as these studies have suggested, but for others, it has actually been an opportunity because they're actually home. And depending on their social situation, they've been able to actually eat better and exercise more. So clearly there is a variation. However, I think the mental health impact and the stress level is definitely universal. Now, if we think about the fact that overall it has resulted in people gaining weight, you've heard about people referring to their pandemic weight. We do need to consider what are the health implications of something like that. Now, these are data from actually before the pandemic, looking at the prevalence of overweight in adults around the world. And overweight is defined as a BMI or a body mass index of 25 to 29. And in this definition, you can see that the world has a lot of work to do. And if you take a look at Canada, we are the same color as the United States, and that's looking at 60% plus. 60% plus of our adults fit in the overweight category. And if we look at obesity, defined as a BMI of 30 plus, Canada's doing a little better than the United States, but not a whole lot better. Canada is sitting in the 20 to 30%, whereas the US is sitting at 30% or higher. But regardless of how you look at these data, there clearly need to be work to do in order to help reduce the rates of overweight and obesity. And one of the reasons for this is the fact that our numbers are already high, but they are projected to get even higher. These are data from the 2022 World Obesity Federation Obesity Atlas. And this is sort of a survey of countries from around the world trying to better understand overweight and obesity. And just to orient you here, these are data for the prevalence or how common obesity is from 2010, 2015, 2020, 2025, and projecting to 2030. And there are the women on the top and the men on the bottom. And you'll see the different colors of the lines. And the different colors represent different regions of the world. Now, we in Canada fit into the Americas. So that would be the red line. Take a look at the red lines. Rising for both men and for women. And this is for obesity, not overweight, but obesity. And it's projected by 2030 that 40% of America's, including us, women will fall in the obesity category and about 35% of men. But what's concerning is that every region of the world is projected to increase over time. And that is a scary proposition because of what we know the health implications are associated with carrying excess weight. And these are some of them here. So these are some of the medical complications associated with carrying excess weight. So things like lung disease, liver disease, gallbladder problems, gynecologic issues in women, osteoarthritis, gout. Then on the left-hand side, things like blood clots, increased risk of cancers, increased risk of a bunch of what we call metabolic things, such as diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, heart disease relevant to today, and then things further up, such as stroke, cataracts, and even elevated pressure inside the brain. So all of these things are in fact associated with carrying around excess weight. Now, some people would say, oh, well, this issue of overweight and obesity is just a eat less, do more. Well, it's not that simple. And I think that we do not do this justice by just talking about eat less, do more. And the reason I say that is that we now recognize that obesity is actually a complex chronic disease. That, of course, energy in versus energy out is the fundamental issue. But the things that control energy in and energy out is not as simple as willpower. And I think we need to recognize that as a society and definitely as a medical profession, because there's a tremendous amount of stigma associated with obesity, and we're all guilty of it. And I think we do need to reflect on ourselves and the language that we use and how we perceive obesity, because we do need to recognize that it is a medical disorder with reasons behind it that go beyond quote unquote willpower. But it is still energy in versus energy out. But like I said, the controls are different. So here's a diagram to help illustrate that. So you'll see on the left, it's about energy in. And then on the right, we're talking about energy out and the balance between energy in versus energy out. But what contributes to a person's ability to balance energy in, energy out is very much contributed to by things like genetics, which is probably the biggest predictor. Certain medications that people have to take can impact that, as well as the biology around hormones that are made by the pancreas and made by the gut, and also made by fat cells themselves, that can impact how energy is used in a given person. And then there's also the environment. So from an environment perspective, as you can see on the right, yes, there are things like inactive lifestyle, which is only partially due to quote unquote willpower, but really has a lot to do with society and how it's been set up. and where things are, and that it's easier to drive to something because we can't walk to something. And then also things like psychosocial factors, which have a huge impact on choices that are made. And then, of course, there's the biology of choices that we make with respect to feelings of pleasure and things of that nature. So with the background being aware that obesity is a chronic disease, and that it is a lot more than just plain old willpower, as sometimes we think it is, and that there are many players involved, we need to treat obesity from a multifactorial approach. And that multifactorial approach includes, of course, medical nutrition therapy, physical activity, but also considering the psychology of obesity, the psychology of eating. We need to consider pharmacotherapy or medications, and we need to consider bariatric surgery or surgical approaches to obesity. So no longer is it good enough for someone to just say to you, eat less, do more. We need to be more mindful of all of the pillars that are involved to help address overweight and obesity. Now, obviously, part of the treatment is the medical nutrition therapy, which is food and, of course, physical activity. So let's take a closer look at those two very important parts of the treatment of weight. From the Obesity Canada guidelines, I took this particular section from an algorithm they had, and I think it's brilliant. These are looking at key nutrition messages for all adults, regardless of weight. So for all of us who are listening to this, these are the key nutrition messages. Healthy eating is more than the foods you eat. Very, very often, I have patients asking me, well, I heard that avocados are good for me, or I'm just going to eat more quinoa, or I'm going to have more blueberries. So they're very focused on specific foods. Why? Because of something they saw on Facebook or something that a friend told them. And it's not just about what foods you eat, but it also has to do with how you eat. And if you take a look at the items on the left under healthy eating is more than the foods you eat, it's important that we be thinking about our eating. Be mindful of our eating habits. We need to be thinking about how and where we're accessing the food. So cooking more often is a goal that's useful for people to aim for. We should still enjoy our food, and this will lead to the concepts of a healthy relationship with food that I'll come back to. Eating meals with others will often be helpful to avoid us sort of wolfing the food down, as is often the case. Food labels are there to help us understand the food content better. We want to generally limit foods that are high in sodium, high in sugars, or high in saturated fat. And we need to be aware of how food marketing can influence our choices. So sometimes you'll have an advertising that says low fat, but then they're very high in sugar, but they don't talk about that part of it. So I think these are things that we need to think about. It's not just about the specific food item being good for you. It has more to do with how we're eating and how we think about eating. The middle section is making it a habit to eat a variety of healthy foods every day. So plenty of vegetables and fruit, eating protein, choosing protein foods that come from plants a little more often than high-fat meats, making water your drink of choice. That is a very tangible goal that many of us can strive for. And then choosing whole grain foods when you are going to choose foods that contain grains. And then the third part is very important for all of us, which is building a healthy relationship with food and eating. And this actually starts in childhood. So for those of you out there who are listening who are parents, something to think about in terms of how we communicate to children with respect to eating. So one should take time to eat. It's not something to be shoved in between an appointment or two. We should notice when we are hungry and we should notice when we are full. So I think the concept, and all of us grew up like this, that you eat at a certain time, well, that's not necessarily the way we ought to be eating. We ought to be listening to our bodies and thinking about when are we hungry, but very importantly, thinking about when are we full. So in other words, if I'm not hungry, I don't necessarily have to be eating at a particular time. And then I have to listen to when I'm full. Better yet, I have to listen to when I'm no longer hungry, and that's when I should stop eating. Plan what you eat so that you're not sort of grabbing something on the go, involving others in the planning and prepping if that's an option. Culture and food traditions should and can be part of healthy eating, because remember, eating should be enjoyable. And then reconnect to the eating experience by creating awareness of your feelings, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Because unfortunately for many people, particularly those living with overweight or obesity, their relationship with food has been distorted over years and years and years, often starting with childhood. And I think it's important that that be examined, often with the help of psychologists, in order to understand what food means to a given person. So then now let's get to the practical stuff. So is there a specific diet that all of you should be following? And I think you kind of know what I'm about to say. And the answer is a resounding absolutely not. One size does not fit all. There is no one diet that is best for weight loss. There is no one diet that is best for sugar control, for blood pressure control, or for cholesterol control. What we know is that the diet or the eating habit that is sustainable, meaning something you can continue to do long term, and that is enjoyable, which then leads to sustainable, is the best choice. And generally speaking, we would talk about portion sizes, we would talk about balancing your plate or balancing your meal. In the world of diabetes, we talk about the size of your fist, one fist being the amount of carbohydrates in a meal, 2 handfuls of vegetables, 1 palm and the thickness of a deck of cards in terms of protein, and then sort of the tip of your thumb in terms of fat. That would be the approximate distributions of different food items in a meal. But again, it's not one size fits all. Size of fist alone is obviously going to be different from person to person. But the idea is to be mindful of your eating, to plan ahead as much as you can, to try to make it an enjoyable process. But for many, it is about examining your relationship with food and how you feel around eating. And then when you want to get into more specifics, this is where a dietitian is absolutely critical in order to help with your efforts. And here you can see on the bottom that there are 3 different ways that diets could be approached. There are food-based approach, there are dietary patterns, and then there's also more intensive strategies with a multidisciplinary team. And all of these work. It all depends on your specific situation, which is where having a registered dietitian as be part of your team is very, very important in order to help you find the right path for you. Now that's all about food, but what about physical activity? Physical activity, absolutely critical, but I do not need all of you to go and join a gym. Not necessary, even though the gyms have opened up, that is not necessarily money well spent, depending on your situation. What I'm talking about is regular movement. So standing is better than sitting. Walking is better than standing. And then walking quickly is better than walking slowly. And then running would be better than walking slowly. So every step counts, literally. Every step up, as well as literally every step. So it's about thinking, what are the things that I enjoy doing? What are the realistic things that I am able to do? And depending on your medical situation, it will be different from person to person. If you have significant arthritis, it may not be possible for you to be running. Okay, fine. Then we'll consider other potential activities that you might like things in the water, if you like water. But if you don't like water, then making that suggestion is obviously not going to be helpful. So it's very much reflecting on yourself, your lifestyle, and what are the simple things that you would be able to do to increase the activity that you do on a day-to-day level. So how do I set these goals for myself? And I think the most important thing to remember is the concept of be smart. So what does that mean? And some of you have heard about this before, and that when you build goals, any goals, be they health goals, be they New Year's resolutions, it doesn't matter what it is, but any goal that you have in life should be a SMART goal. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. Specific, what do you want to do? Measurable, how will you know when you've reached it? Achievable, is it in your power to do it? Realistic, can you realistically achieve it? And timely, when exactly do you want to accomplish it by? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. So for example, your goal might be, I will have more than half of my dinner consist of non-starchy vegetables for at least 3 days a week. Now you'll notice that this is a very specific goal. It's a very measurable goal, and we'll talk about how you're going to do that. And it's also something that we can set a time for and hopefully be realistic. So in order for it to be achievable and realistic, we need to think to ourselves, what am I going to do to make sure it's achievable and realistic? So to do this, I'm going to make sure that I buy vegetables I like and meal prep for the week on weekends. So let's say you do your grocery shopping on the weekends. You're going to prepare a grocery list, which is going to include the vegetables that you actually like to eat. And then you might meal prep for what the weekday dinners might look like, knowing that you're very busy on the weekdays and weeknights, and trying to, prep a salad from scratch just ain't going to happen. So maybe you can buy pre-made salads, or maybe you can pre-make the salad on the Sunday and have it in the fridge. So planning ahead in that sense. And then how am I going to measure it? Well, I'm going to measure it because I'm going to mark on my calendar the days where I accomplish this. And then I'm going to do this by Victoria Day 2022. So I'm going to achieve this regularly by May 24th or whatever the date is for Victoria Day this year. So this would be an example of a SMART goal that you might want to incorporate if it fits your particular needs. Now, of course, there are other examples of potentially SMART goals. So for example, I will walk for 2 minutes every hour. If you're somebody who typically sits a lot for a variety of reasons, then your goal is I will walk for 2 minutes every hour. So I'm going to set an alarm on my watch or on my phone or on my oven timer so that every hour I get up and I walk for 2 minutes. Or example might be I will add a fruit to every lunch. Or I will have water instead of juice at breakfast 5 days a week. Or I will limit my screen time for 30 minutes at a time and then take a 5-minute break. So these are all of the potential examples of a SMART goal. Now, in order for your goals to be achieved, I think an important thing we also have to take stock of is how we're feeling in terms of mental health. Because it's one thing to set, these lifestyle related goals, but if our head's not in the right space, if our emotions are not in the right space, they're not going to be achievable. So I feel like the first thing on the checklist is to really look in on yourself and see how you're feeling, especially during these stressful times. And one of the things that could be helpful when you're doing self-talk is to remind yourself, what are the things I can control and what are the things I cannot control? Now, this graphic came out in the early days of the pandemic. Not everything here is still going to apply, but there was a lot of stress around the unknown and the uncertainty of the situation. And frankly, there's still unknown and uncertainty, but there's always going to be unknown and uncertainty, if not about the pandemic, about something else. So I think the concept of understanding what can I control and what can I not control, and splitting that list out in your mind is a useful tool for all of us to do on a regular basis. The other thing that may be helpful for many is the power of gratitude. And being aware of the things that I should be happy about. And literally making a list is helpful for people, either writing it down, typing it down, voice note, whatever way you want to do it, telling a friend. But starting your day with reminders of what are the good things that are happening to me right now will be helpful to frame the day in a different way. And the power of just getting outside, getting fresh air, moving around if you can, very, very powerful in terms of clearing one's head and clearing one's emotions. And having some sort of routine is also helpful as well. And finally, I want to remind people that this moment is an opportunity. Now, originally, this slide I had shown when sort of in the early days of the pandemic to try to remind people that, yeah, okay, we're in lockdown, but this could actually be an opportunity to do things a little differently. But I actually think that this quote applies anytime. Anytime when there are stresses going on, it may actually be an opportunity because it may actually be a trigger to make some small change. And the small changes will be smart goals that you will create for yourself, but you're gonna make them small. You're not gonna make them huge. Your goal is not to lose 100 pounds in 2 months. Like that is not a healthy goal, nor is it a realistic goal. You're gonna do small things that you can totally do. And then every time you do it, you're gonna mark it down as a success and as something that you will be happy about and grateful for. So every moment is potentially an opportunity. And then of course, especially when you're thinking about your mental health, but also your physical health and wanting to set appropriate goals specific to you, please talk to your doctor, please talk to your healthcare team, because I think they'd be more than happy to help you with that. So finally, the whole pandemic, March 11th, 2020, we're now sitting in April 2022. These last 2 years, I think, have been summarized with the words that are shown here. Everything has changed, significant amounts of stress, and that has, of course, impacted the whole world. And part of that has been with weight gain, as well as less physical activity. And we know that the issues of overweight and obesity are rising worldwide, and that there are medical complications of that, but there is treatment as well. And we need to recognize that obesity is a chronic disease, and that it needs to be approached in that way. That yes, there is physical activity and eating habits, but there's also the psychological treatments, medications, and if appropriate, surgery. And then from an eating perspective, we need to examine our relationship with food. What are our habits around food? Do I feel hunger? Do I feel full? And just take stock of that. And unfortunately, there's no specific diet per se, but speak to your dietitian about what works best for you. And of course, the importance of physical activity. And finally, for your goals, make them smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And very importantly, be kind to yourself. All of us are trying our best. You may set a smart goal, you may achieve it, you may not achieve it. You don't achieve it, reflect on why, change the goal, fix it, reset a new one, do it again. Because failure is part of life. It's not a failure. Not achieving your goal is part of life, and you learn from it, which makes it more likely to achieve your goal the next time. So be kind to yourself. So thank you very much for your kind attention. And again, I very much like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. Wow, what a rich source of information. We've learned a great deal here today. It gives me hope in these uncertain times that we can take control, take our well-being into our own hands, and remain positive about our health. Next up, it's a real honor for me to introduce you to Dr. Tara Sedlak, who will address the neglected topic of heart disease in women. Dr. Sedlak grew up in Kelowna, BC, receiving her Doctor of Medicine degree from the University of British Columbia. She completed her residency in cardiology at UBC. Dr. Sedlak also completed a fellowship at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA, California, specifically focused on women's heart health. In fact, Dr. Sedlak is the only Canadian physician to have completed this program and received a certification in women's heart health. Dr. Sedlak will speak to us about the unique presentation of heart disease in women, its progression, and resources for prevention, rehabilitation, and treatment. Tara.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this Heart Healthy Day. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Tara Sedlak, Medical Director of the Leslie Diamond Women's Heart Health Clinic. And today I wanted to talk to you about women and heart disease, and in particular to touch on the misunderstoods that have come up in women and heart disease. So with regard to an outline, I just wanted to talk about some general facts about women and heart disease. So what are some of the statistics out there that are important to remember? Then I want to talk about these three misunderstoods, and I picked these three because I feel that they're important. The first is talking about sex and gender differences in heart risk factors. So are there differences between men and women with regard to risk factors? The second is whether or not there are differences in how women and men present with a heart attack. What kinds of symptoms do they have? Are they similar or different? And then the third are whether or not there are sex and gender differences in the causes of a heart attack or the causes of chest pain that might be cardiac between men and women. And then finally, in the last few slides, I want to talk a little bit about prevention and what we can do to try and prevent heart disease moving forward. All right, so some of the important facts that we should all remember regarding women and heart disease is that cardiovascular disease is really the leading killer amongst women worldwide. So it's the #1 killer of women. And actually women are 6 times more likely to die of cardiovascular disease than they are of breast cancer. And every 20 minutes in Canada, a woman dies of heart disease. That's pretty important. So during this presentation, 1 woman in Canada, or perhaps 2, will die of heart disease. And finally, 2/3 of heart disease research focuses on men, which is pretty important since we're half the population and we have a high risk of heart disease. We really need to represent ourselves more when it comes to research. So some of the perceptions about women and heart disease have come from this really great report that came out in 2018 from Heart Stroke. And if you haven't read it so far, yet, it's called Misunderstood. And it literally touches on some of the misunderstood, some that I'll speak about today and others with regard to women and heart disease. But they did a survey and found that actually only 37% of young women believed that heart disease could be different or experienced differently for men compared to women. So most people thought that it was experienced similarly. Further, only 28% of women in that survey thought that heart disease and stroke were the leading cause of women's death worldwide. So they really thought that it was breast cancer or some other causes. And finally, only 20% of women in the survey said that women's doctors talk to them regularly about their heart health. So 80% of women are really not talking about their heart health, even with their GP. So I want to start off by outlining a few of these misunderstoods with a few women, a few patients that have come to me with heart health questions or heart health concerns. So the first was a 50-year-old female. She was really asymptomatic. So she described no chest pain, shortness of breath. She would walk up to 3 times a week for even up to an hour at a time and really had no symptoms with this, felt well. But she did have high cholesterol, and she was concerned about this because she'd had it since the age of 30. And so for 20 years, she'd sort of been told by her family doctor, it's high, but we haven't treated it yet. You're young, carry on. But really wanted to speak about that. She'd had 2 prior pregnancies, both of which had had some complications during them. The first was complicated by something called gestational diabetes, which is really diabetes or a sugar problem during pregnancy. And that was controlled with diet. She didn't actually require insulin. And then during another pregnancy, she actually had what's called preeclampsia, which is where her blood pressure went very high during the pregnancy. She had some swelling of her ankles, and some people can even have some abnormalities in blood tests, such as liver function. And some can even have to deliver quite early or go on medication. Thankfully, she was just monitored and did well. She has some significant emotional stressors. She's raising some teenage children and is having a lot of emotional stressors with those. Her parents are not doing well in terms of their health, and so she's trying to take care of them as well. And finally, her mother had a heart attack at the age of 52, and what really brought her to me was saying, geez, I feel like that's a timeline for me. I'm 50 and my mom had a heart attack at 52. You know, what can I do? And she's been told over the years by her family doctor and other practitioners and friends that, you know, she's young, she's female, her risk is low, she's not going to have heart disease. But she obviously wondered otherwise. So misunderstood number 1 is really that women are at low risk for cardiac events and have the same cardiac risk factors as men. And of course, that's a misunderstood, and I'll tell you why. So heart disease trends, this is US data, but it goes similarly for Canada. For the longest time, many, many years, over the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, really flatlined in women. And it's actually gradually been decreasing in men for many, many years. And is actually coming down to be lower in men than it is for women. And only in the last sort of 10 years or 20 years have we really started to see a drop off in terms of cardiovascular disease deaths for women. And a lot of that is because of some of the more contemporary research. So what are some of the risk factors for heart disease in both men and women? Well, really, at the end of the day, there are 8 risk factors that account for about 80% of heart health risk. And I've sort of outlined them here. So smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, as per a blood test, inactivity, we're really not getting out, exercising, obesity, diabetes, so elevated sugar levels, poor diet, and finally, psychosocial stress. And what's important about this list, and what I've highlighted in red, is that there are actually a couple of these risk factors that are even more important in women than they are in men. And in fact, these 3 risk factors, smoking, diabetes, and psychosocial stress, can increase a woman's risk for a heart attack or for heart disease by about 2-fold higher in women compared to men. So while we pay attention to all of these and they are all important in women, I really worry when a woman is starting to show signs of diabetes or when she's continuing to smoke, because for me, that's a really strong risk factor in a woman. And further, psychosocial stress, which is obviously very important as well. So now we recognize that there are some sex-specific risk factors regarding women and heart disease. And what I mean by that is that there are risk factors that occur in women that can't really occur in men because they're related to menopause, they're related to hormones, or they're related to pregnancy, which obviously a man does not go through. And so just briefly, menopause itself, when a woman goes through menopause, even at a normal age, the average age in Canada is 51, that change in hormones of estrogen and progesterone, the drop in estrogen and progesterone markedly increases the risk of cardiovascular disease when that occurs. And certainly early menopause, which a small group of women do go through before the age of 40, does significantly increase the risk of a future heart attack. There's a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is very common. It's traditionally seen with abnormal periods, so irregular menstrual periods, sometimes metabolic abnormalities in their blood tests. They can have high sugar or early signs of diabetes, and also cysts on their ovaries. And this condition, which is commonly seen, can actually increase the risk of cardiovascular disease many years later. And finally, regarding pregnancy, such as our woman who had several pregnancy-related conditions, gestational diabetes, so high sugar during pregnancy, requiring insulin or sometimes just dietary control, preeclampsia, which I mentioned before, which is high blood pressure during pregnancy, and then even some abnormalities regarding delivery or regarding the placenta. So if the placenta's not working well, or a premature delivery, or even stillbirth, all of these can be associated with increased cardiovascular risk, again, many years, 10, 20, 30 years down the road for these women. So inflammatory risk factors are very important. We now recognize that inflammation in a woman's body or in a man's body is an important risk factor. And in particular, some of these conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis, which this woman has here, marked by a lot of swelling and abnormalities of her joints, lupus, which this woman has here, which is sort of the classic butterfly rash, but there are lots of other symptoms and signs of lupus. Both of these inflammatory conditions can double the risk for cardiovascular disease down the road. And so recognition is important and treatment is important. And then obviously surveillance for heart disease. And why it's important in women is that these inflammatory conditions are way more common in women. In fact, 90% of lupus occurs in women and only a very small percentage in men. So breast cancer is a very important risk factor. Breast cancer survivors are doing very well now. We have a great deal of chemotherapies, radiation therapy, newer therapies, and women are doing very well. But there is a risk for heart disease in breast cancer survivors, in particular some of the chemotherapies that we use in breast cancer. One of them that's anthracycline based, one of them that's classically called daunorubicin, can increase a woman's risk of heart disease. Trastuzumab, which has been a great agent, Herceptin, at treating breast cancer, can result in a reduction of the pumping function of the heart and something called heart failure. So that's carefully monitored for during therapy. And finally, radiation therapy is actually an important risk factor, particularly left-sided breast cancer and left-sided radiation, where here in the red, you can see that this is the area of radiation, and actually part of it overlies the heart. And one of the arteries that's quite important for blood supply to the heart actually comes down the front of the heart here and is actually in the window of radiation therapy. And so at times we can see some damage done to that artery by radiation, or some narrowing of that artery, and that can cause heart disease down the road. And finally, depression and anxiety is really felt to be important risk factors for heart disease. 2 times more women than men suffer from depression after a cardiac diagnosis. And depression and anxiety increase a woman's risk of a cardiac event by up to 50 to 70%. And finally, after a heart attack, depression and anxiety, which is common and more common in women, can increase the risk of all-cause death by up to 2 to 3 fold. So these are really important risk factors, and obviously important to recognize, important to treat, and then screen for. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about our second misunderstood, and that is of a 48-year-old female. She is an ongoing smoker and has been a smoker since around the age of 20, about a pack per day. She has a history of anxiety, and she is on treatment for that and feels as though, it's fairly well controlled. And she was well up until one day before work, and she woke up and she had pretty significant tightness in her chest. She described it as tightness sort of in the center of her chest that was quite severe. She thought, oh geez, maybe it's heartburn, I'll take some Tums, but really had no relief. She did a bunch of deep breathing, and again, no relief. And so she was prudent about it and called the EMS. They came to her house, and unfortunately, they immediately thought that she was having an anxiety attack. They took her blood pressure and heart rate, didn't do an ECG, told her to take an Ativan, and unfortunately left and didn't take her into the hospital. And despite this, taking an Ativan, being told that it's probably not heart related, she continued to have ongoing symptoms, and for 6 hours she had pretty significant chest pain. And so she actually called them back, thankfully. And the second group of EMS came and they said, oh no, we need to take you in, and brought her in. And unfortunately, she was suffering from an acute heart attack. And, this is something that we hear about as physicians, and it certainly makes us cringe every time we hear about it. We are hearing about it less and less. The EMS are, in general, very good, as are the ED physicians, at picking up on this. But again, it harkens back to symptoms. So the misunderstood number 2 is that women with a heart attack can have classic male type symptoms, when in fact, sometimes they can have other symptoms and it just goes unrecognized. So this is a great quote. This is from Carolyn Thomas, who has a great online presence. She's a heart attack survivor. She's a blogger. If you have time, look her up. She's written books. But she has this famous quote where she says, "In my mind, the stereotypical heart attack was an old guy clutching his chest on a golf course. Women need to know that they can have a heart attack, yet continue to walk, talk, work." And that was my experience. So she literally had a heart attack when she was at work, and she was kind of going about her day. And lo and behold, she was having a heart attack. So are there gender and sex differences in terms of presentation or symptoms of a heart attack? And the answer is yes and no. So first of all, typical chest pain, which is sort of in the center of your chest or off to the left side, quite significant, often more of a pressure weight on the chest, is found in up to 55% of men and women who suffer from a heart attack, and there doesn't seem to be a difference in terms of that. So that still is the most common symptom, and if you have that, you should really take note of it. But what's different about women is that they can have more jaw and neck discomfort than men. So for example, I have some women who come to me who don't have any chest discomfort, but they just have this ache in their jaw and this neck discomfort. And they've been to their dentist, and their dentist says, absolutely, it's not your teeth. And lo and behold, it's a symptom of angina. Women can also describe their chest pain differently. So I hear this commonly where they don't necessarily describe that classic elephant on the chest that sort of is the male type stereotypical pattern. They describe it more as squeezing or as tightness, but it can be very real and it's just a different description. And then finally, women can have other symptoms like fainting, difficulty breathing, sweating, and these tend to occur more in elderly females. But because women are 10 years older by the time they suffer a heart attack, these can be some of their symptoms and can be quite atypical. And sometimes they won't even have chest pain and will have some of these other symptoms without the classic sort of features. So again, hearkening back to that 2018 Heart and Stroke report, which was really excellent, they portrayed the signs of a heart attack. And, obviously chest discomfort, pressure, squeezing, fullness, burning, heaviness, however you describe it, it's chest pain, sweating, upper body discomfort. So we talked about neck, jaw, particularly in women, shoulder, arms, back. Some women, it radiates through to the back and they feel it between the shoulder blades. Nausea, shortness of breath, and lightheadedness. So all of those are important symptoms. And obviously if they're really profound and they're new and they're not going away, then you should seek medical attention. So some of the other facts about women and heart disease are that 60% of heart disease in women presents as a heart attack. And that's quite a higher number than that of men. And so that's their first presentation, is a heart attack. Further, up to 78% of women can actually miss some of the early heart attack signs. So sometimes there are smaller signs, little bits of chest pain, little bits of other symptoms that have sort of been grumbling, but they sort of ignored them. I thought, geez, it can't be my heart. And yet it's an early sign. So that's something to pick up on. And then finally, women are less likely than men to seek medical attention. And when they do seek help, they're less likely to receive a diagnosis for their heart condition. And we'll talk about why this is in the next couple of slides. So misunderstood, number 3. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about this woman who's come to see me. So she's a 57-year-old woman. She is a school board administrator. She's actually very high up in the British Columbia school board system. And she has a history of high blood pressure, so hypertension, and high cholesterol, and is on medications for those. And she went in for a fairly routine procedure. She went in for a hysterectomy, which is removal of her uterus, and they actually took her ovaries as well because she was having a lot of heavy bleeding. And following the procedure, about 3 weeks later, she began to experience pretty significant left-sided chest pain. And she would feel it almost every time she would walk or exert herself. And then she would rest and it would go away. And for a while, she wasn't sure what to think about it, but then she went and saw her family doctor because it was quite unusual for her. And her family doctor was quite concerned about this and sent her for a stress test. And a stress test, as many of you know, is where you walk on a treadmill and you're monitored throughout by a technician and a cardiologist. And then we look to see whether or not there are signs on the stress test of a problem with blood supply to the heart. And in fact, her stress test was worrisome for a lack of blood supply to the heart, so-called ischemia on the stress test. And so based upon that, she was almost immediately sent to a cardiologist. And the cardiologist was worried enough and said, geez, we need to do the gold standard test, which is an angiogram. And that's an invasive procedure, but a day procedure where cardiologists may go in through the wrist or in through the groin with a small needle and a tube up to the heart and put dye into the arteries surrounding the woman's heart to look for a blockage. So she had this test done, and lo and behold, it was completely normal. In fact, she was told that the arteries were squeaky clean and there was no issue whatsoever. So based upon this, she was reassured, her doctors were reassured, and she was told, geez, well, despite that incredibly abnormal stress test and all the pain that you've had, this must not be heart related because your big arteries on a gold standard test look normal. Unfortunately, she continued to have ongoing chest pain. So she had 2 more visits to the emergency department. She saw 2 more cardiologists who really told her that there was nothing wrong. She saw a gastroenterologist who is a stomach doctor who actually even did a scope down looking for ulcers or narrowing in the esophagus or some sort of a stomach or esophageal problem. That was all normal. And she continued to present to her family doctor, worried about this. And finally, after 5 visits, her family doctor said, I realized that, your heart tests were normal, or at least your angiogram was normal, but I'm going to give you some nitroglycerin spray because it still sounds like it could be angina or heart-related chest pain, and gave her the nitro, and that immediately improved her symptoms. And so then she was referred to us at our Women's Heart Center to work up the potential cause or other causes for her heart symptoms. So misunderstood number 3 is that plaque or cholesterol narrowing in the arteries is the only cause of chest pain or a heart attack in women. And in fact, that's not the case. And I'll kind of show you some statistics on that. So by far and away still, the most common cause of cardiac-related chest pain or angina or of a heart attack is something called atherosclerosis. And really what that is cholesterol plaque causing narrowing of the arteries surrounding the heart and limiting the blood supply to the heart. And so you can see here in this figure, lots of cholesterol plaque narrowing in the artery. There's a limitation in blood flow, and then people feel that as symptoms, often as chest pain or some of those other symptoms that we talked about. And 90% of men or greater have these types of blockages when they have a heart attack, but less so women. And up to 20 to 30% of the time, a woman who has cardiac-related chest pain or angina or even a heart attack can have normal-looking arteries on an angiogram and not have this classic sort of appearance of plaque or narrowing. So what are some of the other causes of a heart attack in a woman if it's in fact not related to these classic narrowing or blockages? Well, what's interesting is that you can still have cholesterol plaque and a clot forming, so-called thrombus inside the artery, and yet by the time you have the angiogram done, some of this could have cleared up and you may not see it. And the classic for that is when somebody presents with a heart attack, they've got chest pain, an elevation in the blood enzymes, abnormalities on their ECG, they go for this angiogram, but unfortunately the angiogram, maybe because they're coming from another hospital and have to be transferred, or there's other people ahead of them, the angiogram is not done immediately, and instead they're treated with blood thinners and clot busters and all that. And so by the time they have the angiogram done, you can maybe see a little bit of plaque, but it's not really narrowing the artery, and this thrombus, which has been treated with blood thinners, is gone. And so it can be sort of a missed plaque scenario, and this scenario is actually more common in women than in men. Other causes could be that the artery can spasm itself down, so it can kind of feel like a Charlie horse, where it starts off quite normal and then boom, it clamps down, quite a severe spasm, and then lets up. They can have a tear in the artery, so-called SCAD, or spontaneous coronary artery dissection, which is where the artery initially starts off normal, but then gets a little tear in it. Blood gets into that tear and then builds up, and then before you know it, it causes an actual blockage. It's not from cholesterol plaque, it's actually from a tear in the artery or a dissection. And then finally, something called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or stress-related cardiomyopathy, is from an overwhelming emotional or physical stressor on the body that impairs the pumping function of the heart transiently, but the arteries of the heart look normal, and then the whole thing resolves when the stress is relieved. And this is found in about 90% of the time in women, very rarely in men. And finally, small vessel disease. So this is so-called microvascular coronary dysfunction. And we know now that it's more prevalent in women. And I love this figure from New York Times called the hidden risk, which is where in men, we tend to see these prominent blockages in the big blood vessels surrounding the heart. But in women, it's actually the tiny micro blood vessels, tiny blood vessels that we can't even see on an angiogram can become blocked up or dysfunctional. And what we know is that in these women with small vessel disease, they actually have a lot of chest pain. So in fact, their chest pain at 5 years out from their diagnosis is greater than somebody who has 1 vessel blockage, 2 vessel blockage, 3 vessel blockage, because we know how to treat this. We put a stent in, we treat them with medication, sometimes we do bypass surgery, and yet this small vessel disease, up until recently, we didn't know how to treat. And so women had quite high pain frequency and poor quality of life. Further, it was costing the system a lot of money. And in fact, the amount of money over a woman's lifetime rivaled that of 1 vessel, 2 vessel, 3 vessel blockages. And it's not because they're undergoing expensive procedures like bypass surgery or stenting like these patients are. It's because they don't have a diagnosis, and so they keep showing up to emergency department, which is expensive. They keep having angiograms done, look normal, which is expensive. They have other testing done like scopes down, looking for ulcers in the stomach, and that's expensive. And so over time, it's quite an expensive and high chest pain frequency condition that really alters a woman's quality of life. So we now know how to diagnose this small vessel disease, which is pretty exciting. In addition to doing an angiogram and looking at the big blood vessels surrounding the heart, what we also do is we can put a wire down, and we can put a wire down into the small blood vessels surrounding the heart. And those small blood vessels can be tested with various agents given intravenously or intramuscularly, called adenosine and acetylcholine. And we can look for a tightness in the small blood vessels or an abnormality in the flow, and we can now make the diagnosis. Now, unfortunately, most of that requires an invasive test. And so what we're doing now is we're doing research on whether we can find a non-invasive test, such as an MRI perhaps, that can properly diagnose this small vessel disease, but not lead to an invasive test that carries some risk. And so, for example, on these MRIs here, when we give a stressor during an MRI, such as one of those injections I talked about, we can see here that there's abnormalities or sort of darker area in the small vessels here that is relieved when pictures are taken at rest without a stressor agent. And same with this diagram here compared to when they were at rest. So this is just examples of how research may push this forward and come up with a non-invasive way to diagnose these patients in the future. Finally, with regard to treatment of this small vessel disease, at first people would call it syndrome X. They wouldn't really know what it was. They didn't know how to treat it. They just knew that these women had poor quality of life and lots of chest pain. But now we know that some of these women can actually still have bits of plaque in the larger blood vessels, not narrowing the large blood vessels, but still bits of plaque. And that bits of plaque can get into the small vessels. And so treating cholesterol, to a certain target, treating blood pressure to a certain target, exercise, diet, all of these are very important. And of course, symptom control is really critical in these patients so that they can work and they can take care of their family and they can return to a normal life. And so some of that involves medications like beta blockers or something called calcium channel blockers or nitroglycerin. Some of it involves some of the newer anti-anginal agents. There's a new one called ranolazine, which is an anti-chest pain drug, just came to Canada in May of 2021 and has sort of resulted in about a 70% improvement in chest pain and quality of life for some of these women. So just recognition and then treatment is obviously very important. So finally, in the last couple of minutes, I want to touch on prevention. So prevention is obviously key, and some of the women I've talked about today, they've already got established heart disease and they're trying to prevent another heart episode, whereas for many of us, we're trying to prevent our first episode. And so what can we do? Exercise is very important. The current recommendations are for exercise about 5 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes at a time. And really, you have to get your heart rate up and such that you're sweating and you can't carry on a conversation. It really has to be aerobic exercise to be heart healthy. Healthy diet. We still talk a lot in the cardiology world about the Mediterranean diet, but at the root of it is really high in fruits and vegetables, high in legumes, chicken and fish, low in red meats and high fat dairy products, those types of dietary recommendations. Smoking cessation is obviously very important. In particular, we know smoking is a very high risk factor in women. We touched on that in the beginning. Maintaining a healthy weight is obviously important. And monitoring and treating risk factors is very important. And in particular, what I mean by that is a lot of us haven't seen our doctors during the pandemic and haven't had our blood pressure checked and maybe haven't gone for a blood test in a while. So just making sure that we remember to sort of get a general checkup done, get our blood pressure checked, get our sugar checked to make sure we don't have signs of diabetes, get our cholesterol checked. So some of these standard risk factors are very important. And then obviously maintaining good psychosocial and mental health. So in terms of reducing stressors that way. So So what does the future involve with regard to women and heart disease? Well, I think there are a number of things. I think building awareness is critical. I think the Heart and Stroke has done a great job of that with their Misunderstood report and other advocacy campaigns. I myself am part of a large advocacy campaign called the Canadian Women's Heart Health Alliance. It's led by Ottawa, but all the different provinces and territories are involved. During February every year, we run something called the Her Heart Matters, or Wear Red Canada campaign, which is really where we get out there and raise awareness about heart disease in women. So I think we need to continue to build on this and sort of improve those statistics I talked about in the beginning. We need to invest in women, in terms of research, in terms of exercise programs and lifestyle modifications. I think that's all very, very important. I think we need to empower women. And at the end of the day, sometimes I tell women, we like to think that we can rely on the healthcare system to do everything for us, but sometimes it falls short. And sometimes, if you've got a symptom in the back of your head that's just really niggling and you don't know what it is, please look into it and empower yourself to sort of take charge of this. Or if you've got risk factors or you've got a family history and you want to get checked out, please see your family doctor, get some screening done, get all of your risk factors checked. So empowering women, I think, is really important. Emphasizing more research in women. Still to date, 2/3 of research is done in men. We're trying to increase that, but we need patient help, and we need women to get involved in that. But thankfully, Heart and Stroke and CIHR and other funding agencies now are really mandating that women become part of research. And then finally, thinking about women's heart health centers. I run a women's heart health center in Vancouver. There are various ones across Canada. Who are dedicated to looking at some of these other disorders we talked about, the small vessel disease, the spasm of the arteries, the so-called tear in the arteries or dissection. All of those are more common in women and can be looked at in some of these specialized centers. So finally, I just want to summarize. Thanks everyone for spending this last half an hour with me. But just to remind you, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer amongst women worldwide. 6 times that of breast cancer in terms of mortality. Some of the novel risk factors in women, and sex-specific risk factors we talked about, pregnancy-related risk factors, menopause-related risk factors, hormone-related risk factors are all very important. And if you have a lot of those risk factors, make sure that you get checked out. Make sure your heart health is sort of at the top of mind moving forward. We know that in women who suffer a heart attack, up to 1/4 of the time, it's not due to a classic blockage in arteries. It can be to one of these other entities we talked about, such as small vessel disease or spasm of the arteries or a small tear inside the arteries. And these are not easily diagnosed with current technology, such as even angiograms, which is an invasive procedure. So just keeping that in mind and, trying to promote research in that area. And finally, with regard to prevention, it really is critical at the end of the day, both primary prevention, where you're trying to prevent your first event, or secondary prevention, where you've had an event or trying to prevent another event. All of those things we talked about is really key in trying to improve women's quality of life and obviously improve their long-term outcomes. So with that, I just want to end off with a picture of this. This is myself and my family all wearing red in February, in particular on February 13th. Every year we run this Her Heart Matters Wear Red Canada campaign. If you want to, please get involved next year at wearredcanada.ca. And these are just my kids, showing that they want to become involved in heart health. And now they're talking about it in their schools and in their gymnastics. And it's really exciting. So again, thank you for involving me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I think we can all take a wellness break at this point. Let's learn about mindfulness and put into practice motivational skills that our previous speakers have spoken about. Please welcome Jillian Monahan. Jillian has been practicing yoga for 2 decades. She is passionate about the alchemy of movement and mindfulness for all ages, for its impact on our heart health and an overall improved quality of life. She reports that the benefits are most profoundly felt with regular practice and engagement within a supportive community. Her professional background is in international business and communication. She recently moved back to the region after 7 years in Panama. She currently teaches a weekly yoga class from the Galt Collective and sees private clients for yoga and mindful eating and living. Jillian.
Hey, welcome to your mindfulness break. My name's Jill. I'm a student of yoga, and it is my honor and pleasure to be your guide through this moment of taking a break from the really exciting and probably pretty intense learning that you've been doing. So I'm going to guide you through a breath and meditation practice. And one of the ways I pay tribute to the roots of yoga is using the wording of pranayama and dhyana. Pranayama being breath, life force energy, and dhyana being stillness of the mind or meditation. Now, I'm not a doctor, but these studies have been shown neurologically to help with memory retention and focus. So as you move back into the learning part of this schedule, you can hold on to the information you're getting and have a little more focus in your mind. It also helps with heart health. So just begin by becoming aware of the space that you're in. Maybe you're in a comfortable space where you normally spend time, but notice the smells, the sounds, just where you are. And I would like to offer a territorial land acknowledgement to the space that I am in. And in doing so, I offer gratitude and respect to the original stewards of this land, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Chonotan people. I am presently on the Haldimand Tract, and if my windows were open, I'd probably hear the sound of the Grand River flowing next to me. So with that acknowledgement of my space, begin to come into your own body now. In your space, begin to, as you look around, begin to feel your breath entering your body, perhaps through your nose, perhaps through your mouth, whatever feels most comfortable for you. I'm going to guide you through 3 shortened breath or meditation type practices as just an introduction to breath work. So begin feeling your breath entering your body. Perhaps it feels cool on your nostrils. And then a little bit warmer as you exhale. Find yourself in a comfortable position, and just as you're becoming aware, maybe you want to shift. Maybe you want to sit on the earth. Maybe you want to lie down. However you want to be is fine. You can even do this moving. If your body's telling you need to get a drink of water or you need to go to the washroom, do that. And then as you're doing it, be aware of your breath. So the first practice we're going to do is called samavriti. It's equal parts. So become aware of the length of your inhale. An easy number that's sort of an average breath is 4 counts inhale. So inhale for 4. Or maybe it felt like you wanted to do less or more, and then match that on your exhale. So I'm going to use a count of 4, but I invite you to do what feels most comfortable for you. So inhaling, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. We're going to add a pause so that we're going to pause in between the inhalation and the exhalation. So I think we're coming back to inhale, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, or pause, 2, 3, 4. And now just let this breath, this count internally, move your breath. Perhaps place your hands on your body and really feel the expanse as the breath comes in and out. So perhaps bring a hand to your heart and a hand to your belly. Let your belly be really soft and feel how it expands with the inhalation and contracts with the exhalation. Just really connect with the feeling of your own breath. Perhaps feel the breath waves, not just in your belly, but moving through your whole body. And as you're in this breath, you can drop the count and just begin to breathe naturally. Perhaps drop the pause or use that if that feels supportive and that feels comfortable in the breath that you're doing. The next practice we're going to do is a practice of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk who recently passed but is known as an amazing peace activist and spiritual teacher. And the practice is really just acknowledging your breath. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. And so you can lose the count, but just move with that thought. Simple and yet profound. Focus on that moment and nothing else. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. One of the quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh that I find really simple but also a great reminder of this idea of mindfulness is that mindfulness is the most precious gift that we can give to people in our lives. Just really being fully present. And so these few minutes are that, giving that full presence to yourself. These practices are simple, but they are practices. And so if this is your first breathwork practice and you don't feel comfortable, I invite you just to feel that feeling and then return to your breath. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. If you feel uncomfortable, shift in your seat. Again, just find a comfortable way to be. We're only going to be here for another minute or two. And now release that thought, and I invite you just to bring your focus internally. So perhaps you draw your internal vision to your third eye, this middle point in your head or in your mind. Just the ability to bring your focus there. And feel your breath move through your body. The inhalation rises up to the crown of the head, almost like a flower coming through your body. And then the exhalation is this grounding force, drawing the energy down into the earth. And let those breath waves just guide you here for a few more moments of calm. Let the inhale rise up your body, and let the exhale flow down, perhaps feeling that whole wave roll from the top of your head down and out through the bottoms of your feet. It was just a short practice today, so I invite you now to return to your space. Perhaps move a little bit in your body. You can wiggle your fingers, rub your hands together, gently blink your eyes open if they were closed during the practice. And these practices are simple yet profound. Just taking a single breath can save you in any moment of short reaction. Or developing a practice where you do these practices regularly can help with mind, body, and soul. So thanks so much for being with me today.
I'm feeling so much more motivated and positive about moving forward with the changes I need to make, aren't you? Have you written down any SMART goals yet? Thank you everyone for sticking with me. This has been an exceptional day. I've learned so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity now to talk to you. My presentation is entitled, Be Your Own Heart Hero. We all need to work at regaining our heart health for ourselves, our families, our loved ones, and our community. So, the first question I have for you is, if you don't have heart disease already, you haven't been told you're at risk for heart disease, are you at risk Do you need to make changes if you haven't been told to do so already? Well, we certainly know that every 7 minutes, a Canadian dies of heart disease or stroke. During the 20 minutes that I'll be speaking to you, 3 to 4 Canadians will pass away from a disease that is preventable. So yes, it impacts all of us. We all know someone, our family, our friend, that's been affected by heart disease. We are all at risk. We need to all make an effort to prevent this disease from remaining the scourge for all Canadians and the #1 cause of death and disability across the planet. So yes, we are all at risk for heart disease, and we can all make an effort to stay heart healthy. So today's topics for me to address with you are, what is heart disease? We need to understand it before we're going to prevent it. What are the risk factors that we need to change? Things in our control that we can do something about. And why women in particular need to know about heart disease. In fact, more women will die of heart disease than any other illness. And rates of heart disease in women are climbing at a faster rate than in men. So women need to be aware of their heart risk and make an effort to control this condition. We will be talking about actions that you need to take for your heart health. Practical things that you can do to make a difference in your heart over the long term. We also all need to recognize the warning signs and the symptoms that can tell us that they may be a marker that you're having a heart attack or stroke. Things that you need to know to survive. And ultimately, it's about getting back on the road to heart health for all of us, for our families and our loved ones. So let's begin. What is heart disease? The most common type of heart disease is called atherosclerosis, or what some people call hardening of the arteries. We're born with clean arteries, blood vessels that carry blood to the heart. Over time, fatty plaque starts to build up inside those arteries and starts to narrow the opening of the artery, reducing how much oxygen-rich blood can get to the heart, reducing the function of the heart with time. That's the most common type of heart disease on the planet. And it is in fact something that takes years, decades in fact, to develop. Studies suggest that people in their teens and 20s start to form fatty plaque that progresses with time. And over decades, it continues to narrow the blood vessel until it reaches a tipping point at which the blood vessel ruptures open and a blood clot forms. It's that clot that leads to the heart attack. But as I always tell my patients, the day you had your heart attack was not the day that the disease started. It actually started 15, 20 years earlier. It continued to progress over time and reached a tipping point at which the blood vessel ruptured open and triggered that heart attack. So it is a disease that happens with time. We need to get early intervention to prevent it. But unfortunately, it is not a disease that is ever cured. Once you have heart disease, it's something you'll need to continue to work to control for the rest of your life. So a heart attack happens when that plaque, that fatty laden narrowed segment, ruptures open, as I said. Once it ruptures open, a blood clots on that blood vessel, preventing any further blood flow getting through the artery. And all of the heart tissue, the muscle below that segment, starts to die. That dead heart muscle is what we call a heart attack. This is an unfortunate gentleman's autopsy result. He had a heart attack from a blood clot inside the most important artery in the body called the LAD. It supplies 60% of the heart muscle. And when the blood clotted on that narrowed artery, no further blood flow got through, and a huge portion of his heart died. And unfortunately, he did not survive. That's what we need to prevent. You need to know the risk factors that you can control to prevent that from happening. So let's talk about that. Certainly, we all know that we need to avoid exposure to nicotine and tobacco products. Whether it's smoking, vaping, or e-cigarettes, all of those can be toxic to our lungs and our heart, and we need to avoid any exposure to it. Fortunately, there are very effective strategies to help people who smoke or vape quit. Seek out the help, speak to your healthcare provider. There are excellent strategies to help you get there to become tobacco-free. Many of us have gained weight during this pandemic, as we've talked about a few times during this last few hours. We need to develop strategies to get our weight back under control. And we've been stuck indoors. Physical inactivity rates have just skyrocketed over the last 2-3 years. We need to get back outdoors, figure out strategies that we can do indoors, and stay active going forward. Stress, anxiety, depression, mental health conditions have again skyrocketed over the last 2-3 years. All of that impacts our heart. We need to find strategies, seek out help where necessary to manage our mental health conditions. For many of us, this has been a very emotional time, a time where anger rates have really also gone up, and outbursts cause a surge in adrenaline. Our body produces this toxic hormone when we're angry and upset. That has direct toxicities on the heart, damages the heart. So get help if you don't feel like you're in control. There are, again, excellent resources in our community. Speak to your healthcare provider about support that you might need to stay in control. All of these behaviors, however, have deleterious effects on the heart through various mechanisms. One of them is through increasing rates of diabetes. As we've gained weight, as we've become less active over the last few years, we're seeing an epidemic of diabetes. And diabetes is more than just a little bit of sugar. Diabetes is a condition where blood sugar clearly goes up, but so do other things. High cholesterol, blood pressure goes up, our blood vessels get damaged, and that's what leads to the narrowing. In fact, we say that diabetics who've been a diabetic for 10 years are at the same risk of a heart attack as somebody who's already had a heart attack. Yeah, you heard me right. If you've had diabetes for 10 years, but never had a heart attack, your chances of a heart attack are the same as somebody who's already had a heart attack. So it really means we need to control this condition, be aggressive about it. And fortunately, we've had major breakthroughs in the last few years on the management of cardiac risk factors for diabetics. Exceptional therapies that have become available to us that can change the course of heart disease in diabetics. So, speak to your healthcare provider. Ask them if you're a diabetic. Are you on the best medications that can help control your diabetes and prevent your heart disease? Or do you need to change something? Just because you've been on something for your diabetes for many years doesn't mean that that's the best there is today. Stay up to date, get help, speak to your healthcare provider. We certainly also know that high blood pressure damages our blood vessels. So what is high blood pressure? So blood pressure is that pressure inside our blood vessels that pushes up against the wall. So think about it as a tube. If you're continually stretching it, that tube will start to get damaged. And as it gets damaged, it's much more prone to that narrowing and plaque buildup that we talked about. And remember, that plaque buildup is all fatty cholesterol that's gotten inside the blood vessel and narrowed the blood vessel. So controlling our cholesterol through lifestyle changes, weight loss, and where necessary medications is also essential, preventing the narrowing of arteries from forming and reducing the risk of a heart attack or stroke. Unfortunately, there are some risk factors that you can't control. Your family history. If heart disease runs in your family, if many family members have had a heart attack or stroke, unfortunately, you may have genes that increase your risk. So it's even more important that you do everything else right. You can't change your genes, but you can change other behaviors that can reduce your future risk for heart disease. And certainly we know that aging is an impact on heart disease. All of us are at a greater risk for heart disease as we get older. Men above the age of 55, women after menopause, significantly higher rates of heart disease. But for women, as Dr. Sedlak has told us earlier today, there are specific conditions like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes that happens during a pregnancy that can increase the future risk for heart disease for women. So be aware of that. Think back, during your pregnancy, did you have problems with sugar or blood pressure elevation? And remind your healthcare provider about that as you get older, because that can impact your future risk for heart disease. And knowing that empowers you to make the changes you need to make to prevent heart disease from forming in the future. Other risk factors that you need to be aware of that can increase your risk for heart disease: a condition called sleep apnea. That's a condition where at nighttime you're not sleeping in a manner that allows adequate oxygen to get into the blood. And when there's not enough oxygen in the blood, the heart has to work much harder. Working harder at a time that the heart should be resting ultimately damages the heart and can increase the risk for heart failure, strokes, and kidney failure, in fact. Too much alcohol. Many of us during this pandemic have been drinking a bit too much, and alcohol also has direct toxicities on the heart. So we suggest that women limit their alcohol intake to 1 drink in 24 hours, and men 2 drinks in 24 hours. If you can reduce it even less, all the better, but those are the guides to try to think about. Another condition that can impact our risk for heart disease is anemia. Anemia is a condition where your body's just not making enough red blood cells. And when your red blood cells are lower, there's less oxygen in your blood, again reducing how much oxygen is coming back to your heart, and again making the heart work harder so that the rest of the body can get enough oxygen. All of this can impact your risk for heart disease. Unhealthy diets can contribute to anemia and all of the risk factors that we've just talked about. So making changes that can keep your heart healthy is essential throughout your life. One of the things to know about when we talk about risk factors for heart disease, however, is the multiplier effect. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that if you have one risk factor for heart disease, you've doubled your risk for heart. If you have 2, you've quadrupled your risk for heart disease. And if you have 3 or more risk factors, you've increased your risk for heart disease tenfold. So it is a multiplier effect. But the good news is that the reverse is also true. By just doing 4 things, keeping your weight controlled, being physically active, not smoking, and leading a healthy diet, you can lower your risk for heart disease by 82%. That's unbelievable. This is under our control. We can change this disease. We need to stay motivated to do so. What women need to know about heart disease, though, as Dr. Sedlak has told us earlier, heart disease can permanently damage your heart and your life. Heart disease kills more women than all forms of cancer combined, including breast cancer. It is, in fact, the #1 health concern for all women. It is the #1 killer of women across the planet. We need women to know that. We need women to take the changes, make the changes necessary to stay heart healthy. And there are risk factors throughout a woman's life that can impact their risk for developing heart disease. When women are younger, the onset, the timing at which they started to have their menstrual cycles can impact their risk for heart disease. A condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS, which is sometimes common in young women, can also impact the risk for heart disease. The use of oral contraceptives impacts heart disease risk, and preterm menopause, menopause happening too early, can again impact the risk for heart disease. During pregnancy, there are specific conditions that I mentioned briefly earlier, also increasing risk for heart disease. If women have gestational diabetes, where their sugar goes up during their pregnancy, that can in future increase their risk for both diabetes onset later in life, but also the onset of heart disease. Gestational hypertension, where blood pressure elevations occur during pregnancy, again, impacts the risk for development of heart disease. For older women, the time at which they develop menopause impacts their risk, and the use of hormonal replacement therapy, depending on the type of hormone replacement, can impact their risk as well. So for women, it is important that they know that throughout their life there are specific things that can change and impact their risk for developing heart disease. Being aware of that and seeking help to make sure you control risk factors is essential. So here's what I want women to know. Women need to know that heart disease is their #1 greatest health risk, more than all cancers put together. But it is also largely preventable. 82% of the risk for heart disease development is under our control. So women need to take action now to protect their hearts. This is a now problem. Later might be too late. So what is heart disease in women? Well, the most common form of heart disease remains atherosclerosis, or narrowing of the arteries. Remember, we talked about that earlier. That fatty plaque that starts to build up inside the blood vessels, narrows the blood vessels, and reduces blood flow to the heart. That remains the number one cause of heart disease in women. It progresses year over year. It is a progressive condition that needs to be controlled early and controlled over time. But as Dr. Sedlak has taught us earlier, there are other causes for heart attacks that are more unique to women. The number one cause still remains that fatty plaque buildup due to cholesterol, leading to that blood clot triggering the heart attack. But there are other conditions like coronary vasospasm. That's where the artery itself might be pretty clean of plaque buildup, but goes into spasm. It pinches down, and when it pinches down, it doesn't allow enough blood to get through, triggering heart damage. Much more common in women than men. Another condition more common in women is called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, or SCAD. So SCAD is a condition where the artery itself might be relatively healthy, but it tears open. And when it tears open, again, blood clots inside the blood vessel and prevents blood from getting through. Much more common in women than men. And another condition more common in women is called Takotsubo, or stress cardiomyopathy, or what the lay public sometimes refers to as broken heart syndrome. That's a condition where under emotional distress, loss of a family, breakup of a social relationship, job stress, suddenly causes a surge in adrenaline, a hormone that's toxic to the heart. It causes microvessels to go into spasm and damages the heart muscle, even though the arteries are normal. That again is much more common in women. So women need to be aware that there are conditions that are unique to women that they need to be aware of, and if they have symptoms, they have concerns, they need to seek out help. But the good news is that heart disease can be prevented and controlled. Prevention includes changes, lifestyle changes, but sometimes also the need to take medications. So if it is recommended, please follow through. Heart disease is a now problem. As I've said earlier, waiting for later might be too late. Young women need to take steps to protect their heart health, since heart disease starts to develop early in our teens and 20s and gradually progresses with time. As women start to age and hit their perimenopausal years, in their 40s through 60s, estrogen levels start to drop as they get into menopause, and during that time a number of risk factors can develop that can increase the risk for atherosclerosis or narrowing of the arteries in women. And certainly older women need to remember and remain motivated to control their heart risk. They're much more likely to develop heart attacks and strokes as they age, as they get into their postmenopausal years. So it is a now problem for all women of all ages. Talk to your doctor. Talk to them about your risk for heart disease. What is it that's putting you at specific risk, and what can you do about it? Prepare a list of questions before that visit. Write down what the healthcare provider says. And tell the healthcare provider about behaviors that you're concerned about, whether it's smoking, physical inactivity, and ask for resources, help to overcome those risk factors. There's a number of supports in place in our communities that you can seek out, and your healthcare provider can guide you there. So remember, heart disease is one you can control. You can lower your risk for heart disease. Stay motivated. Begin today and make changes one step at a time. If you smoke or vape, please work at quitting. There are resources available in our community to help you quit. Seek them out. Speak to your healthcare provider. They can guide you in that. And we all need to become physically more active. Our goal is to get to 2 hours and 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity each week. If you can do that as 30 minutes 5 times a week, perfect. If you need to break that up and do 15-minute sprints because of timing, perfect. Whatever will allow you to get to that goal, that is the target. But add strength training 2 to 3 times per week. Light weights helping to maintain our muscle mass and our bone health are also essential for our cardiovascular health. So exercise is the panacea for so much of the illnesses that besiege us today. You can also lower your risk for heart disease through a better diet, however. Follow a healthy eating plan, one that's low in saturated fats. Trans fats should really be eliminated from the diet, and cholesterol should be as low as possible with a moderate amount of total fats. Limit the salt or sodium content of your diet. The recommendation is try to keep it below 2,500 milligrams per day. Limit the amount of alcohol, as we've talked about. For women, 1 drink a day, and for men, 2 drinks a day should be the maximum. Choose a variety of fruits and vegetables of multiple colors, as they say. They all have micronutrients that are beneficial for our hearts. And choose protein sources that are also healthier. Plant proteins, fish, poultry, and lean meats. Use non-fat or low-fat milk products, cheeses, and yogurts. All of this can help us maintain a healthier diet and maintain a healthy weight. So remember, you can lower your risk for heart disease. Work on smoking cessation, follow a heart-healthy diet, exercise regularly, get enough sleep. It's recommended that adults sleep between 7 to 8 hours per day. Seek out help for stress management, depression, the mental health concerns that also impact our hearts. All of these things can impact risk factors that can increase heart disease, like diabetes. Control your diabetes. Seek out better, newer treatments that are available for diabetes control. Keep your blood pressure controlled, and control that high cholesterol, high triglycerides through healthier diet, weight loss, exercise, and where necessary and prescribed, take the medications necessary to prevent this disease from developing or progressing. This is something we can control. It has to be an all hands-on deck approach. Diet, exercise, stress management, smoking cessation, and where necessary, medications. Together we can defeat this disease. But even when we do it all, unfortunately some people will still sustain a heart attack or stroke. So know the warning signs for heart attacks and strokes, and if you think you're having a heart attack or stroke, call 911 immediately. Paramedics will arrive on scene and will start treatments while they're at your home. Don't drive yourself to the hospital. So what are those heart attack symptoms that we should be aware of? For many people, it can be chest pain, discomfort, pressure, or a squeezing sensation in the chest. But it can also be pain actually anywhere in the upper body, in one or both arms, the back, shoulders, neck, jaw, or upper part of the stomach. I tell my patients, pain between your nose and your belly button is your heart unless you're sure it's not. Don't take a risk. If you're not sure what it is, you're concerned it might be your heart, seek out help immediately. Call 911. Some people unfortunately don't get pains though with their heart symptoms. Some people just get short of breath. If you're feeling short of breath unexpectedly, really struggling to catch your breath, not sure why that's happening, again, it might be your heart. Seek out help, call 911. If you break out in a sweat unexpectedly, it's not a warm environment, you're not doing anything particularly physical, why did you break out in that cold sweat? Not sure, it's persisting, seek out help, call 911. For women, sometimes it can be manifested as fatigue, feeling really lethargic and tired unexpectedly. You didn't do anything unusual. You got a good night's sleep, but you're still exhausted. Why is that? If you're not sure, sometimes in women that can in fact be a manifestation of heart disease. Again, don't take a risk. If you're not sure, could it be your heart? Seek out help. Some people feel nauseous and start to vomit unexpectedly. Again, you're not sure why that should happen. You didn't eat something that upset your stomach. Why did you suddenly get so nauseous? Nausea can sometimes be a warning sign for heart conditions. Seek out help if you're not sure. The best course to do if you're not sure is call 911. Never drive yourself to the hospital if you're concerned, because minutes matter. Know the warning signs. If you're not sure if it's your heart, call 911 immediately. Fast action saves lives. If you're having a heart attack, each minute some of your heart's dying. If you're having a stroke, each minute part of your brain is dying. We need to stop that heart attack, stop that stroke immediately. And paramedics can start treatment in the field, at your home, to help reduce the injury that can occur from that event. So never drive yourself to the hospital. I've repeated that. Why is that? Well, God forbid something happens on the road. Not only would you injure yourself, but potentially you could injure other people. Paramedics can start treatment in the field. Call 911 if you're concerned you're having a heart attack or stroke. And you know what? Uncertainty is normal. Don't be embarrassed by a false alarm. You show up at the hospital, it didn't turn out to be your heart. I'm not upset by that. I always tell my patients, 5 times you end up at the hospital, all 5 of those times it wasn't your heart. The 6th time you're having those symptoms, I still want you to go to the hospital because maybe that time it is your heart. I'm never upset if a cardiac patient shows up at the emergency department with chest pains, shortness of breath, feeling unwell, to check and make sure it's not their heart, and it turned out not to be the heart. Well, fantastic. I'm really happy about that. You weren't having a heart attack. Don't take a risk, and don't be embarrassed if it turns out not to be your heart. But make a plan for what to do if you have a heart attack. Speak to your healthcare provider. What are the symptoms you need to be aware of? And when should you seek out help in the ER? When should you call 911? Your healthcare provider can help guide that. So don't be embarrassed by it. Minutes matter. Stay motivated. Seek out help. Because remember, prevention begins with you. Take it one step at a time. Replace unhealthy habits with healthier ones. Eat for a healthy heart. And start physical activity. Perhaps start walking each day. Try 10 minutes, gradually increasing it with time. And remember, the goal is to get to 2 hours and 30 minutes each week. Keep going. Stay motivated. View changes as a lifelong change, a lifestyle change, not quick fixes. I always tell my patients what you do for an hour, a day, a week, or a month doesn't matter. What you can do and sustain doing, keep doing for the rest of your life, that's what counts. So quick fix, fad diets never count. I want you to adopt changes to your diet and exercise that you can live with for the rest of your life. If you can't become a vegan for the rest of your life, then don't choose that as a diet source. If you can't run a marathon each month, then don't make that as your target. Do things that you can sustain. These are lifelong goals that you need to keep up with year after year to keep your heart healthy. It is not a quick fix. But set realistic goals. I know that I don't have the stamina to run a marathon repeatedly throughout the year. So if I don't, that can't be my goal. It has to be things I can do each year, each week. And buddy up. All of us can lose motivation, can lose our stamina, our will to keep going and keep doing the things that we need to do to stay heart healthy. But having a partner, whether it's your spouse, family, friend, loved one, that you can do together will keep you motivated together. If you lose focus or they lose focus, you can get back on stream. They can help you get back on stream. So buddying up, I found it to be very effective. I know that when I exercise with my wife, I stay motivated. It helps me to maintain my stamina. But don't worry about slipbacks. All of us can get off track, may not eat as well as we wanted to, may not exercise that week as much as we wanted to. Don't beat yourself about that. Keep going. Stay motivated, get back on track, and reward your successes. If your goal was to lose that 10 pounds over the next 6 months and you achieved it, fantastic. Reward your success, not with a fatty meal necessarily, but pat yourself on the back. Let your family or friends know what you achieved, what you wanted to achieve, and reward your successes so you can stay motivated. This is a lifelong change we're all trying to work on. And be your own advocate. Ask questions, seek out information, speak to your healthcare provider. What are the things that you can do to stay heart healthy, and how can you achieve those goals? Be your own heart hero. It's up to you to protect your heart, to stay healthy. Start today. Thank you everyone for staying with me for the 18th Annual Healthy Heart Day. What an exceptional day. I've learned so much from our exceptional group of speakers. I've also learned practical things to stay heart healthy. I want you to make sure you implement the SMART goals that you set for yourself today. This is a day of action, and I want you to make sure at the end of this event that you have set those SMART goals and you've started a plan to implement those SMART goals. Thank you so much for being with us today, and obviously it's very important for me to thank the various people that have been essential for putting this event together. As many of you know, this is an event that my wife Michelle puts on year after year. This is something very dear to her heart, and she works so hard to make sure it comes together. As many of you also know, Michelle is an accomplished pharmacist. She's a medical researcher who leads an exceptional team of researchers at the Cambridge Cardiac Care Centre, advancing our understanding of heart disease and strategies to prevent it from continuing to progress. She also leads our cardiac rehabilitation and prevention program, guiding us and motivating us to stay focused on heart health. Thank you, Michelle, for your passion about this condition and for putting the effort in year after year to put this event together. But obviously an event like this requires a whole group of individuals. And this group of individuals is chaired by the Board of Director of the Prevent Clinic, Dr. Mike Lowry. Mike is a colleague and a friend who was the former Chief of Staff at Cambridge Memorial Hospital and the Compliance Officer at the College of Physicians and Surgeons. He leads a tight ship, making sure that all of us stay focused on our goal of empowering our community to stay heart healthy. Thank you, Mike, for your passion and your dedication to this community. And speaking of community, I am so privileged to work with Keshta Sinayaki. She is our patient and community representative, and she brings a youth and vitality. She is the focus of our efforts to get the word out through social media and advertising to make sure all of us in our community and around the world really are aware of the risk for heart disease and the practical things that we can do to stay heart healthy. Kesh, thank you so much for all of your dedication and efforts to put this event together and get the word out to people. Certainly an event like this requires a team, a village in fact, to put together. And this is the committee for this year's Healthy Heart Day. I thank each and every one of them for their dedication and hard work. And I want to thank our media sponsors, Rogers TV, who are broadcasting this event and helping us to get the word out about heart health year after year. The Waterloo Region Record, again for their dedication in health promotion and community advocacy, as well as the radio stations of 96.7 Chime FM, 106.7 Country, and 570 News, all of whom have put the effort in to let our community know about this event and to help promote heart health through this community. And our corporate sponsors that help us put this event together, both through manpower and financial support. And our community sponsors, the City of Cambridge and the Mayor that addressed us earlier, for their commitment to keeping our city healthy and promoting heart health throughout our community. This event is sponsored also by the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, and we are raising funds for heart and stroke through our website. Please click the link and help support heart health education and research in Canada. The Cambridge North Dumfries Health Team for their dedication to heart health promotion. Langs Farm Community Centre for their continued support and ongoing advocacy for diabetes health and heart health in our community. And Amanda Knapp from RBC Wealth Management for her support and dedication to get the word out. And of course, I have to thank the staff of the Cambridge Cardiac Care Centre, a dedicated group of individuals from various facets of health promotion, for their dedication to ensure that we implement our tagline, prevention, detection, therapy, making sure that we give people the tools they need to prevent heart disease from progressing. Thank you for your commitment to this community and for your efforts to put this event together. But I come back to my wife, Michelle, who really is the heart and soul of this event. Each year, she puts the effort in to put this event together, make sure that our community is given the resources and the tools we need to implement heart health prevention. And she does this in the memory of our Grandma Linda. I lost my mother-in-law now 18 years ago to the ravages of diabetes and heart health. Heart disease progressed very quickly in Grandma Linda, and we were so saddened by her loss. But she really motivates us. It's in her memory that each year we put this event on. She was an accomplished nurse in Toronto who really was dedicated to the health of her family and her community. And her guidance is what motivates us each year. Grandma Linda, we will never forget you. We love you, and you guide us each year to do better, to make a difference in our community. It is your memory that remains the force that keeps us motivated. And you, the participants, thank you for staying with me through this event. It's your dedication to staying heart healthy and building a healthier community that motivates me and all of our speakers to do better each year. I hope you'll join me next year for Healthy Heart Day 2023. It's going to be a great event.